Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Quiet Life. Nate Romero had built his life on carefully constructed normalcy. For 8 years, he'd been the IT consultant who fixed network issues for small businesses in Riverside, Oregon, a town small enough that everyone knew the weekend farmers market schedule, but large enough that newcomers didn't raise eyebrows. He'd chosen it deliberately, the way he'd chosen everything since that night in Seattle when 3 men with federal badges had offered him a choice he couldn't refuse. The dining room of their 2-story colonial smelled like Miranda's famous pot roast, the kind that made neighbors slow down when walking past their house on Arlington Street. Nate watched his wife set down the serving dish, her auburn hair catching the light from the chandelier he'd installed himself last spring. Miranda had no idea that the man she'd married, the patient, gentle father who helped with homework and coached Ella's soccer team, had once infiltrated the Volkov syndicate's encrypted networks and handed the FBI enough evidence to dismantle a criminal empire worth $300 million. 7-year-old Ella was telling them about her school day, something about a science project on volcanoes, when Nate's phone buzzed on the table. He'd never been one to check messages during dinner. It was a house rule he'd established, but something made him glance down. The screen blazed white with a single message from an unknown number. Do not react. Walk out. The pot roast turned to sawdust in his mouth. His training kicked in immediately, that old FBI instinct that had kept him alive through 3 undercover operations. He forced himself to chew, to swallow, to keep his expression neutral, even as his heart rate spiked. Then he saw Ella. His daughter had gone completely still, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. Her eyes were locked on her tablet, the one she used for educational games, and even from across the table, Nate could see the white glow reflected on her face. She looked up at him, and in her brown eyes, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Fear, recognition, understanding. Ella mouthed 2 words, smile. Now, Nate's mind raced through possibilities like shuffling cards. How did Ella have a device that could receive messages? He'd configured that tablet himself, locked it down to approved apps only. Who could have bypassed his security? And why would they contact his daughter? And then Tommy said his volcano would be bigger than mine, but I told him size doesn't matter if the chemical reaction is, Dad, are you okay? Miranda was looking at him with concern. He realized he'd frozen, fork in hand. Yes, sweetie. Just remembered I forgot to send an important email. He smiled, and it felt like his face might crack. You know what? I think I left my laptop on upstairs. Miranda, would you mind if I need to pee, Ella announced suddenly, pushing back from her chair with enough force to make it scrape against the hardwood floor. Like really bad. It wasn't subtle. Ella was many things, brilliant with computers, curious to a fault, stubborn as her mother. But subtle wasn't in her repertoire. Well, go then, Miranda said, laughing. You don't need permission. Nate stood. I'll just grab that laptop real quick. He could feel Miranda's confusion as he left the dining room, could sense her wondering why both of them were suddenly fleeing the table. In the hallway, Ella grabbed his hand. Her small fingers were trembling. Daddy, there's a bad man, she whispered. He sent me a message. He knows about Russell. The world tilted. Russell Schwartz, his former partner at the FBI Cybercrimes Division. The only person outside the agency who knew where Nate had relocated. The only person who could have sent that warning. Bathroom, Nate whispered back. Now, they slipped into the downstairs bathroom, and Nate locked the door. He knelt down to Ella's level, his hands on her shoulders. How do you know about Russell? Ella's lip trembled, but she met his eyes. I found your old phone, the one you keep in the garage, in the toolbox under the rusty nails. I know you check it sometimes when you think we're asleep. Christ, he'd underestimated her. Again, 3 weeks ago, I figured out the password, she continued. I just wanted to see pictures of you when you were younger. But then I saw the messages. About the Volkov thing. About witness protection. About Ella. His voice came out sharper than intended. He softened it. We'll talk about the snooping later. Right now, I need you to tell me exactly what the message said. She pulled her tablet from under her shirt. It came through the game app. The volcano one. Someone hacked it. Nate took the device. The message was still there, burning on the screen. Your daddy made a very bad man very angry. That man is in your house right now. If you want your mommy to live, you'll do exactly what I say. Make your daddy leave the dining room. Smile like nothing is wrong. You have 30 seconds. The timestamp showed it had arrived 4 minutes ago. Beneath it, a second message. Good girl. Now stay in the bathroom. Your daddy has 5 minutes to get to the front door and walk outside. Alone. If he doesn't, your mommy dies. If he tells her anything, your mommy dies. If he calls the police, your mommy dies. The gun is already pointed at her head. Nate's vision tunneled. Every cell in his body screamed to run back to the dining room, but his training held him still. Panic got people killed. Panic was the enemy. He had 4 minutes. Ella, listen to me very carefully. He kept his voice steady. Stay here. Lock the door after I leave. No matter what you hear, you stay here until I come get you. Do you understand? But mommy, I will handle this. I promise you, I will keep her safe. But I need you to be brave and trust me. Can you do that? Ella nodded, tears streaming down her face. Nate kissed her forehead, unlocked the bathroom door, and stepped into the hallway. He could hear Miranda humming in the dining room, clearing plates. She had no idea that somewhere in their home, someone was watching her through a scope. He had 3 minutes. The front door seemed miles away. Each step felt like walking through concrete. His mind cycled through scenarios. Where would a shooter position himself to have line of sight on Miranda in the dining room? The living room had a clear angle. So did the kitchen, the stairway landing. Too many options. He could rush the dining room, try to pull Miranda down, and no. If the shooter was professional, Miranda would be dead before Nate crossed the threshold. If this was Hugo Herring, and who else could it be, then the men he hired weren't amateurs. 2 minutes. Nate's hand touched the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at him not to open it, not to leave his wife vulnerable. But Ella's face flashed through his mind, and he knew he had no choice. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The October evening was cool, the street quiet except for the distant sound of the Hendersons' dog barking. Nate's sedan sat in the driveway, Miranda's SUV beside it. Normal. Everything looked so goddamn normal. Walk to the sidewalk, a voice said. Nate spun. A man emerged from behind the oak tree in their front yard, tall, wiry, with a tactical earpiece and a gun held casually at his side. Not pointed at Nate. Not yet. Nice and slow, the man continued. He had an accent, Eastern European. My colleague inside is getting impatient, and you don't want her to twitch when she's got that rifle on your pretty wife. Her. Nate filed that away. What do you want? The man smiled. Walk to the sidewalk, Mr. Romero. Or should I say, Special Agent Romero? Oh wait, you're not FBI anymore, are you? You took their deal. New name, new life. Too bad you couldn't keep your nose clean. Nate walked to the sidewalk, mind racing. If there was a sniper on Miranda, it meant they wanted him alive. Otherwise, they would have just killed them all. That gave him leverage. The man followed, keeping 6 feet of distance. Professional spacing, close enough to shoot accurately, far enough to react if Nate rushed him. A car is going to arrive in 30 seconds, the man said. You're going to get in it. You're going to go see someone who's been waiting a very long time to meet you. Hugo Herring. The man's smile widened. He'll be so pleased you remembered. A black SUV turned onto Arlington Street, moving slowly. Too slowly. Deliberately. Here's what happens next, the man continued. You get in that car without fuss. We drive away. Once we're 10 miles outside town, my colleague will leave your house. Your wife will never know she had a rifle pointed at her skull while she washed dishes. Your daughter stays quiet in that bathroom like a good little girl. Everyone lives. Simple. And then you and Mr. Herring have a conversation about consequences. The SUV pulled up to the curb. Tinted windows. No plates visible from the front. Nate had perhaps 3 seconds to make a choice. Get in the car and hope he could outthink Hugo Herring. Or make a move now and gamble with Miranda's life. The rear door of the SUV opened. Nate got in. Chapter 2. The Ghost. The SUV smelled like leather cleaner and gun oil. 2 men sat in the front. the driver, and a passenger who kept his hand rested on something in his lap. Another gun, undoubtedly. The man from the yard climbed in beside Nate, pulling the door shut with a solid thunk. "Hands on your knees," the man ordered. "I'm going to search you now. If you fight, Dennis here will call our girl at your house, and we'll see how fast she can pull that trigger." Nate complied. The search was thorough, professional. They took his phone, his wallet, even his watch. When they were satisfied, the SUV pulled away from the curb. Through the tinted windows, Nate watched his house recede into the distance. Somewhere in there, Miranda was probably wondering where he'd gone. Ella was locked in the bathroom, terrified, and a woman with a rifle was watching them both. "How'd you find me?" Nate asked. The man beside him, Dennis, apparently chuckled. "You really want to know? Or are you just stalling?" "Genuine curiosity." "Your daughter." Nate's stomach dropped. "Not directly," Dennis continued, seeming to enjoy this. "But kids these days, they can't help themselves. 3 months ago, your little Ella joined an online game community. Used her real first name, mentioned she lived in Oregon. Started chatting with another girl, someone who said she was 9 and loved science too." Nate closed his eyes. He taught Ella about online safety, but he'd configured that tablet for educational apps only. How had she? "The volcano game," Dennis said, reading his expression. "It has a chat feature. Your parental controls didn't catch it because it's buried in the settings. Only activates if the kid wins 3 achievements." Ella's smart. She won 5. The other girl wasn't 9. Geneva's 28, actually. Good with kids, though. Patient. She spent weeks building trust, getting Ella to share little details. The town name eventually slipped out. From there, it was just process of elimination. How many IT consultants in Riverside have a 7-year-old daughter named Ella? Exactly 1. The SUV turned onto the highway, heading south. Away from town. Away from any help Russell might be able to send. If Russell even knew what was happening yet. "You used my daughter as bait." "We used your daughter as a search engine," Dennis corrected. "The bait was you caring more about your family than yourself. Hugo said you would. He studied you for years, you know. Read every report, every case file. He knows you better than you know yourself." Nate forced himself to breathe slowly. Panic was the enemy. Fear was the enemy. He needed to think. "Hugo's brother died in prison," he said. "Alexei Volkov. Shanked to the throat in the yard. 3 years into his sentence." "You've done your homework." "Hugo blamed me. You gave the FBI the encryption keys to Alexei's entire operation. You testified at his trial. You're the reason Hugo's brother spent his last days in a 6x8 cell, pissing in a metal toilet and eating food that barely qualified as edible." Dennis's voice hardened. "Yeah, Hugo blames you." The SUV exited the highway, turning onto a rural road Nate didn't recognize. Trees pressed close on both sides, their branches forming a tunnel of shadows. They were heading into the national forest, he realized. Thousands of acres of wilderness where a body might never be found. "How long have you worked for Hugo?" "Since I was 19. 22 years now." Dennis pulled a cigarette from his pocket, but didn't light it, just rolled it between his fingers. "Hugo saved my life. Gave me purpose. Family. Everything. Family." Nate kept his voice neutral. "Is Geneva your wife?" Dennis smiled. "Sister, actually. We're a tight operation. Hugo doesn't trust easily, but when he does, it's blood deep." The SUV slowed, turning onto a dirt road barely visible through the underbrush. Branches scraped against the windows. They drove for another 10 minutes, deeper into the forest, until they reached a clearing. In the center stood a cabin, old, weathered, but maintained. Solar panels on the roof. A generator humming somewhere out of sight. This wasn't some abandoned shack. This was a planned location. The SUV stopped. Dennis opened the door and gestured with his gun. "Out." Nate climbed out, his legs stiff from the drive. The air was cold, smelling of pine and earth. No houses visible in any direction. No sounds except the wind and the distant cry of a bird. The cabin door opened, and a man stepped onto the porch. Hugo Herring looked nothing like his brother. Where Alexei had been broad and brutal, Hugo was lean and refined. He wore an expensive suit, his silver hair swept back, his face weathered but distinguished. He could have been a banker, a lawyer, a professor. He looked civilized, but Nate had seen the files. He knew what Hugo had done to the people who'd crossed his brother. Knew about the accountant who'd skimmed money and been found in 12 separate locations. Knew about the girlfriend who'd gone to the police and simply vanished, never to be found. Hugo Herring was a monster in a nice suit. Nate Romero, Hugo said, his voice smooth. Though I knew you as Nathan Rodriguez when you infiltrated my brother's organization. Different name, same face. You're older now. Softer. Fatherhood suits you. Let my family go. This is between us. Hugo descended the porch steps slowly, deliberately. You're not in a position to make demands. But I appreciate the sentiment. Shows you still have spine, even after 8 years of playing house. He stopped 5 feet away, studying Nate like a specimen under glass. Do you know what it's like to watch your brother die alone? Hugo asked quietly. To get a phone call from a prison chaplain telling you that Alexei bled out on concrete, surrounded by strangers who cheered? They cheered, Nate, because you made him into a symbol, the big bad criminal brought down by the clever FBI. Your brother was a criminal. He destroyed lives. My brother, with a businessman operating in a market society, refuses to acknowledge. But I'm not here to debate morality. Hugo's expression hardened. I'm here for payment. What do you want? Hugo smiled, and it was worse than any anger could have been. I want you to understand what you took from me. So I'm going to take everything from you. But first, we're going to have a conversation. He gestured toward the cabin. Inside, I prepared something special. Dennis prodded Nate forward with the gun. They climbed the porch steps and entered the cabin. The interior was surprisingly sophisticated. Computer equipment lined one wall, monitors, servers, enough processing power for serious operations. A table in the center held a laptop, open and running. On the screen was a video feed. Nate's dining room. Miranda was sitting at the table, looking at her phone with a concerned expression. She kept glancing toward the hallway, clearly wondering where Nate and Ella had gone. Live feed, Hugo said. Geneva is in your attic. She's been there for 3 days, actually. Came in through the access panel in your garage while you were at work. Very patient, my Geneva. Very professional. Nate's hands clenched. 3 days. This woman had been in his house for 3 days, watching his family, waiting. Here's what's going to happen, Hugo continued, moving to stand beside the laptop. You're going to answer my questions honestly. Completely. Every lie, every evasion, I'll know. And every time you lie, I'll have Geneva hurt your wife. Nothing fatal. Just pain. A broken finger, perhaps. A cut. Enough to teach you the value of truth. You're insane. I'm motivated. There's a difference. Hugo pulled up a chair, sitting down across from Nate. Now, let's begin. Question 1. Do you have any regrets about what you did to my brother? Nate met his eyes. No. Hugo's expression didn't change. Honest. Good. That would have been a disappointing lie. He typed something on a laptop. On the screen, Miranda stood up, walking toward the hallway. She's going to check on Ella, Hugo observed. Motherly instinct. Geneva will let her knock on the bathroom door. Let Ella say she's fine. We're not monsters, Nate. We're not going to traumatize a child unnecessarily. You already traumatized her by sending those messages. A necessary evil. Now, question 2. During your time undercover in the Volkov Syndicate, did you develop any feelings of loyalty or friendship toward the people you were betraying? The question surprised Nate. He'd expected threats, demands for information. Not this psychological excavation. Some of them were just kids, he admitted. Runners, low-level dealers who didn't have other options. I felt sorry for them. But you testified anyway. They broke the law. Even the 17-year-old, Marcus Petrov, the one who went to juvenile detention and hanged himself 3 months later. Nate's jaw tightened. He remembered Marcus. A scared kid who'd been recruited by Alexei's lieutenants, promised money and protection. A kid who'd seen Nate as a mentor. Marcus made his own choices. As did you. Hugo leaned back. Tell me, does Miranda know? About your real past? No. Does she know that the man she married is a lie? That Nathan Rodriguez doesn't exist? That you built your entire relationship on deception? I built it on love. Love and lies. Interesting combination. Hugo typed again. On screen, Miranda returned to the dining room, but now she was on her phone, calling someone. She's calling you. Your phone is obviously here with us, so it'll go to voicemail. She's starting to worry. Nate watched his wife's face crease with concern. The guilt was a physical thing, sitting in his chest like a stone. Question 3, Hugo continued. If you could go back, knowing what you know now, knowing about Marcus, about Alexei's death, about the lives ruined by your investigation, would you still do it? This was the real question, Nate realized. This was what Hugo needed to hear. Yes. Hugo's eyes flashed. Even knowing it would end like this? With you in this cabin, your wife in danger, your daughter terrified? Yes, because your brother and his organization destroyed hundreds of lives. They trafficked drugs that killed teenagers. They ran protection rackets that bankrupted honest businesses. Enough. Hugo held up a hand. I've heard the FBI's propaganda. I wanted your truth. He stood, pacing to the window. Outside, darkness was falling, the forest becoming a wall of shadows. Here's my truth, Nate. My brother raised me. Our parents died when I was 12, and Alexei was 19. He could have put me in foster care, taken his freedom, lived his life. Instead, he worked 3 jobs to keep us together. He taught me to read, to fight, to survive. Everything I am, I owe to him. Hugo turned back. So, when you took him from me, you took my whole world. And now I'm going to take yours. By killing me. Oh no, death is too simple. Hugo smiled that terrible smile again. I'm going to dismantle your life piece by piece, starting with the truth. He nodded to Dennis, who pulled out a phone and dialed. After a moment, he put on speaker. Hello. It was Miranda's voice, anxious and confused. Mrs. Romero, Hugo said pleasantly. My name is Hugo Herring. I'm sitting here with your husband, and we need to have a conversation about who he really is. Chapter 3. The Truth Unravels. Who is this? Miranda's voice came through the speaker, sharp with confusion and rising fear. Where's Nate? What? Your husband is safe, Hugo interrupted smoothly. For now, and he'll remain safe as long as you listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Nate lunged forward, but Dennis was ready. The gun barrel pressed against his temple, cold and uncompromising. Don't, Hugo said mildly, not even looking at Nate. Miranda, are you sitting down? I'm calling the police. The woman in your attic will kill you before you finish dialing. She's 3 feet above your head right now, looking at you through a thermal scope. You're wearing a blue sweater, you're in the dining room, and you just set your phone on the table to put me on speaker. Am I correct? The silence stretched out. Then, small and frightened, yes. Good. Now, go get your daughter from the bathroom. Bring her to the dining room. I promise you, we won't hurt either of you if you cooperate. Nate's mind raced, searching for options, finding none. The gun was still against his head. Hugo had thought of everything. On the laptop screen, they watched Miranda walk to the hallway with shaking steps. She knocked on the bathroom door. Ella? Sweetie, it's okay. You can come out now. The door opened. Ella's face was blotchy from crying, but she wasn't hysterical. She held her mother's hand as they walked back to the dining room. Excellent, Hugo said. Now, Miranda, I'm going to tell you about your husband. The real story. And Nate here is going to confirm everything I say, because if he doesn't, my colleague will put a bullet through your kitchen window. It won't kill you. She's too good a shot for that, but it will hurt tremendously. Do we understand each other? Yes. Miranda's voice was barely a whisper. Hugo began. He told her about Nathan Rodriguez, the FBI special agent recruited straight out of MIT's computer science program. Told her about the 3-year undercover operation in the Volkov syndicate. Told her about the testimony that had sent 47 people to prison. Told her about the witness protection deal, the new identity, the deliberate deception. With each revelation, Nate watched Miranda's face on the screen. Watched confusion turn to disbelief. Disbelief to dawning horror. Nate, she said when Hugo paused. Tell me this isn't true. The gun pressed harder against his temple. It's true, Nate said quietly. All of it. Miranda's face crumbled. You lied to me. For 8 years, we met at that coffee shop. You said you were new in town, that you just moved for work. Was any of it real? My feelings for you are real. Are real. Miranda, I love you. You built our entire marriage on a lie. Her voice broke. Did the FBI tell you to marry me? Was I part of the cover story? No. God, no. Meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Ella. You're everything. Don't you dare bring Ella into this, Miranda hissed. Don't you dare use our daughter too, did she know? Is that why she was acting strange? Hugo interjected smoothly. Your daughter discovered the truth recently. She's quite intelligent, breaks into password-protected phones when she's curious. You should be proud. Mommy, Ella's small voice. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Sure, baby. This isn't your fault. Miranda pulled Ella close, and Nate could see his wife's hands trembling. None of this is your fault. Touching, Hugo said. But we're not finished. You see, Miranda, your husband isn't just a liar. He's also the reason a 17-year-old boy named Marcus Petrov committed suicide. He's the reason 53 children lost their parents to the prison system. He's the reason my brother died, bleeding on concrete. Your brother was a criminal, Nate said, unable to stay silent. My brother was family. Hugo's composure cracked for the first time. And you took him from me with your self-righteous crusade. You didn't just arrest criminals, Nate. You destroyed lives, families. And you did it all while pretending to be one of us, earning our trust, sharing our meals. He turned back to the phone. So here's what's going to happen, Miranda. You're going to listen to your husband confess every detail of what he did, every lie he told, every person he betrayed. And when he's done, you're going to understand exactly who you married. For the next hour, Hugo extracted the story from Nate like pulling teeth. Every question was designed to wound, to expose, to shame. He made Nate describe the friendships he'd formed while undercover, the trust he'd earned and betrayed. Made him recount the look on Alexei's face when the FBI burst into that warehouse, when Alexei realized that his trusted computer specialist was the one who'd sold them out. Through it all, Miranda said nothing, just held Ella and listened. Question 17, Hugo continued, consulting notes on his laptop. The night you proposed to Miranda, you just come from a meeting with your FBI handler. Correct. Yes. You've been authorized to deepen your cover by entering a serious relationship. The FBI psychologist had cleared you for potential marriage and children, as long as you maintained operational security. That's not why I proposed. I proposed because I loved her. But you had permission, official sanction for your deception. It wasn't. Nate stopped, seeing the trap. Anything he said would sound like justification. Yes, I had permission. On the screen, Miranda flinched. Hugo smiled. You see, Miranda, your entire life has been a CIA operation. Every birthday, every anniversary, every moment you thought was real, all of it approved by bureaucrats in Washington. FBI, not CIA, Nate said. Does it matter? Hugo shot back. The point is, she was never your wife. She was your assignment's collateral damage. That's not true. Then tell her. Hugo gestured to the laptop. Tell her the truth about why you really married her. Tell her about the panic attack you had after proposing, the one Russell Schwartz talked you down from. Tell her how you almost backed out. Nate closed his eyes. Russell had sworn that conversation was confidential. How did Hugo know? We've had a long time to investigate you, Hugo said, reading his thoughts. Russell wasn't as careful with his reports as he should have been. The FBI has leaks, same as any organization. And we paid very well for information about you. He turned back to the phone. Miranda, your husband nearly ran away the night before your wedding. He had a bag packed, a plane ticket to Canada. He was going to disappear because he couldn't stand the guilt of lying to you. Nate? Miranda's voice was barely audible. I didn't run, Nate said desperately. I stayed. I married you because I couldn't imagine my life without you. But you thought about it. You almost left me at the altar. I was scared. I'd never been so scared in my life because I was about to make the most important decision I'd ever make, and I couldn't tell you the whole truth. But I stayed, Miranda. I chose you. You chose the lie. The words hit like a physical blow. Hugo was watching Nate's face with satisfaction. There it is. The moment she understands. Beautiful, isn't it? The death of trust. Dennis's phone buzzed. He checked it, then whispered something to Hugo. Hugo's expression changed, became calculating. It seems we have a complication. Russell Schwartz has been trying to reach you, Nate. When you didn't answer, he got nervous. He just called the Riverside Police Department to request a welfare check on your house. Nate's heart leapt. Russell knew something was wrong. Geneva, Hugo said into the phone. Police will arrive in approximately 12 minutes. You need to be gone in 10. Make it clean. Wait. Miranda's voice was panicked. You said you wouldn't hurt us if we cooperated. I lied, Hugo said simply. But I'm not going to kill you. Geneva will leave your house, and you'll be safe. For now, the police will find nothing wrong, and you'll tell them everything is fine. Because if you don't, if you say even one word about me or this phone call, I'll come back. And next time, I won't be so merciful. Mommy, I'm scared, Ella whimpered. I know, baby. I know. Miranda's voice was shaking, but there was steel underneath. We're going to be okay. On the screen, they could see movement in the ceiling, insulation shifting, a panel moving. Geneva was extracting herself from the attic. One more thing, Hugo said. Miranda, I want you to think very carefully about what you've learned tonight. About who your husband really is. About the lies he's told. And I want you to ask yourself, can you ever forgive him? He ended the call. The cabin fell silent except for the hum of the computer equipment. Through the window, full darkness had arrived, the forest invisible beyond the glass. That was the first payment, Hugo said quietly. Your wife knows the truth. Your marriage is destroyed. Now we move to the second phase. What do you want from me? Nate asked. Everything. Hugo pulled up a new screen on the laptop. Files, directories, terabytes of data. You're going to help me rebuild my brother's empire. You're going to use your FBI knowledge to create an unbreakable network. And you're going to do it willingly, because if you don't, I'll kill everyone you've ever cared about. Miranda, Ella, Russell, even your former colleagues at the FBI. I'll never help you. You will, because I'm not giving you a choice. Hugo nodded to Dennis. Take him to the basement. Let him think about his priorities. Dennis hauled Nate out of the chair, gun still pressed to his spine. They descended a narrow staircase into a concrete room, cold, bare, with a single chair bolted to the floor. Sit, Dennis ordered. As Nate sat, Dennis pulled zip ties from his pocket, securing Nate's wrists to the chair arms. When he was satisfied, he stepped back. Hugo's going to break you, Dennis said conversationally. It's what he does. He's very good at it. I've seen him work on men tougher than you. They all break eventually. I'm not like them. That's what they all say. Dennis headed for the stairs. Get comfortable. You're going to be here a while. The door closed. The lock clicked. Nate was alone in the darkness, with nothing but his thoughts and the knowledge that somewhere 8 miles away, his wife and daughter were trying to process the wreckage of their lives. He'd underestimated Hugo Herring. Thought the man would want simple revenge, a bullet and a shallow grave. But this was so much worse. Hugo wasn't going to kill him. He was going to hollow him out, use him, make him complicit in the very thing he'd spent his career fighting. Unless Nate could find a way to turn the tables. He started working on the zip ties, feeling for any weakness in the plastic. His wrists were already chafing, but he ignored the pain. Because Nate Romero, Nathan Rodriguez, had been in tight spots before, had faced down worse odds. And he'd survived by being smarter, faster, more ruthless than his enemies expected. Hugo Herring was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Chapter 4, The Setup. Nate spent the first 3 hours methodically testing every inch of his restraints. The zip ties were professional grade, tight enough to cut off circulation if he pulled too hard, loose enough to keep him conscious. The chair was solid steel, bolted into the concrete with heavy anchors. No obvious weaknesses. But Nate hadn't survived 3 years undercover by giving up easy. The basement was roughly 15 by 15 feet, concrete floor and walls, a single bare bulb overhead controlled by a switch at the top of the stairs. No windows. One door. The air smelled of damp earth and something chemical, bleach, maybe, or industrial cleaner. His FBI training kicked in, cataloging details. The concrete walls were new, no more than a year old. Someone had poured this foundation recently, which meant this cabin wasn't just a hideout. It was purpose-built. Hugo had been planning this for a long time. Around 2 a.m., the door opened. Dennis descended with a bottle of water and a protein bar. "Dinner," he said, holding the water to Nate's lips. Nate drank. The water was lukewarm, but clean. His tactical mind noted that Hugo wanted him functional, not desperate. That gave him leverage. "You know this won't work," Nate said. "Even if I help him build his network, the FBI will eventually find out. They monitor me." Dennis laughed. "You really think the FBI gives a shit about you anymore? You were useful 8 years ago. Now you're just a liability on their books. Russell checks in once a year. Maybe." That's it. It was true, and Nate knew it. Witness protection worked by abandonment. Give people new identities and then forget about them. The FBI had bigger problems than one former agent living in Oregon. "Hugo's been watching you for 3 years," Dennis continued. "Learned your patterns, your contacts, your life. You're alone, Romero. No backup coming. No cavalry. Just you, us, and the choices you make." He left the protein bar on the floor, just out of reach. A small cruelty. When Dennis returned upstairs, Nate went back to work. The zip ties were secured through a metal loop welded to the chair arm. Standard interrogation setup. But the welding wasn't perfect. Nate could feel a rough edge where the metal had cooled unevenly. It would take hours, maybe days, but if he could saw the plastic against that edge. He started working, slow and methodical. By dawn, his wrists were bleeding, but he'd made progress. The zip tie on his right hand was fraying, the plastic fibers starting to separate. Another few hours, maybe less. The door opened again. This time, it was Hugo, immaculate despite the early hour, carrying a laptop. "Good morning," he said pleasantly, as if they were old friends meeting for coffee. "I trust you've been thinking about my offer." "Go to hell." Defiant. "I respect that." Hugo set the laptop on a folding table he'd brought down. But defiance without strategy is just noise. "So let me show you something that might clarify your priorities." He turned the laptop screen toward Nate. It was a video feed of Miranda's bedroom. The angle suggested a camera hidden in the smoke detector. High quality, clear audio. Miranda was packing a suitcase, moving with jerky, angry motions. Ella sat on the bed, watching. "She's leaving you," Hugo observed. "Can't really blame her. 8 years of lies is a lot to process." Nate's jaw clenched. "You said you'd leave them alone." "I said I wouldn't kill them. I never said I'd stop watching." Hugo pulled up another window, traffic camera footage. "She's planning to drive to her sister's house in Portland. Shannon Hickman, married to a lawyer, 2 kids. Miranda thinks she'll be safe there." He minimized the window. "But here's the thing, Nate. I don't want to hurt your family. I want to use them. Leverage is only effective if the hostage stays alive. So here's my revised offer. You work for me, build what I need, and I guarantee Miranda and Ella's safety. They'll never even know they're being protected. Or you refuse, and I'll make their lives a living hell. Not through violence. That's crude. Through exposure." "What do you mean?" Hugo's smile was reptilian. "I have 8 years of surveillance on you. Every corner you cut. Every time you broke your witness protection protocols. Remember that trip to Seattle 2 years ago? The one you told Miranda was a work conference? You actually went to meet Russell because you were worried about a leak in the FBI's Oregon field office." Nate's blood ran cold. "Or how about the time you hacked into the Riverside police database to check if they had any connections to organized crime? Illegal search, no warrant. Or the cash you've been slowly moving into offshore accounts, just in case you need a run? All documented, all ready to be sent to the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility. They won't care. I'm not active anymore. Maybe, but they will care about the perjury. You testified under oath that you had no contact with criminal elements after entering protection. But you've been monitoring the remnants of the Volkov syndicate for years, haven't you? Checking to make sure none of Alexei's people got released, tracking their movements. That's a legal contact, Nate. That's a violation of your protection agreement." Hugo had done his homework. Every word was accurate. If the FBI revokes your protection, your real identity becomes public record. And then every enemy you made over the past 15 years will know exactly where to find you. How long do you think Miranda and Ella would survive? It was a perfect trap. Cooperate and betray everything he believed in, or refuse and watch his family be destroyed. I need time to think. No, you don't. You need time to pretend you have a choice. Hugo closed the laptop. But I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you 12 hours. At 6 p.m. tonight, you'll give me your answer. Yes, and you start building my network. No, and I make one phone call that ruins your life. He headed for the stairs, then paused. Oh, and Nate, your little trick with the zip tie and the welding burr? Impressive. Dennis noticed about an hour ago. We've been watching through the camera in the corner. Nate's eyes found it. A small lens, almost invisible against the dark concrete. But please, keep trying, Hugo continued. It's entertaining, and it keeps you distracted from the real problem. You've already lost. You just haven't accepted it yet. The door closed. The lock clicked. Nate stared at the camera, then at his bloody wrists, then at the zip ties that he now knew would never break in time. Hugo was right about one thing. Defiance without strategy was just noise. So Nate needed a strategy. He closed his eyes and let his mind work the way it had during his undercover days, not in straight lines, but in angles and misdirection. Hugo thought he had all the leverage, thought he'd planned for everything. But every plan had vulnerabilities. Every careful scheme had one moment where it could be flipped. Nate just had to find it. He started with what he knew. Hugo wanted a network built. That meant time, weeks, or months of work. He couldn't kill Nate until it was finished. That was leverage point one. Dennis and Geneva were loyal, but they were also human. Humans made mistakes, got complacent. That was leverage point two. Russell was out there, worried enough to call for a welfare check. He might be Nate's only ally, but he was a good one. Former Marine, excellent tactical mind, stubborn as hell. That was leverage point three. And then there was the biggest vulnerability of all, Hugo's rage. Men driven by revenge made emotional decisions. Hugo had stayed cold so far, but that was a performance. Underneath, he was burning, and fire could be manipulated if you knew which way the wind was blowing. Nate opened his eyes and looked at the camera. I want to make a deal, he said clearly. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the door opened. Hugo descended, eyebrow raised. Your 12 hours aren't up. I don't need them. I'll build your network. Hugo's eyes narrowed. That was easier than expected. You were right. I don't have a choice. But I have conditions. You're not in a position to... Hear me out. Nate met his gaze. You want an unbreakable system. That takes trust. If I'm working under constant threat, I'll make mistakes. Or worse, I'll sabotage it in ways you won't catch until it's too late. I'm very good at subtle sabotage, Hugo. I did it to your brother for 3 years. Hugo's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. So here's my offer. I build your network complete and functional. In exchange, you guarantee Miranda and Ella's safety. Real safety, not just surveillance. And when it's done, you let me go. Fake my death if you want. But you let me disappear, and you never contact my family again. Why would I agree to that? Because I'll build you something better than you imagined. Not just a network, a fortress. Encrypted protocols the FBI can't crack. Routing systems that make the old Volkov syndicate look like child's play. I'll give you my absolute best work. And I'm supposed to trust that? No, you're supposed to verify it. Have your own tech people review every line of code. Test it against federal systems. I'll prove it works before you let me go. Hugo studied him for a long moment. You're planning something. Of course I am. I'm planning to save my family and get out alive. But I'm also planning to give you what you want. Because the alternative, you exposing me, destroying Miranda, making Ella grow up knowing her father is in prison, that's worse than working for you. It was a calculated play. Hugo needed to believe that Nate was beaten but rational, desperate enough to cooperate but proud enough to demand terms. Hugo smiled slowly. You're good. I'll give you that. You almost sound sincere. I am sincere. About saving my family. All right. I'll accept your terms, with one addition. Miranda and Ella stay under surveillance. Not in their house. I'll pull Geneva out. But I'll have eyes on them at Shannon's place in Portland. If you try anything, if I even suspect you're sabotaging the work, I'll know immediately. Agreed. Hugo extended his hand. After a moment, Nate would have shaken it if his wrists weren't zip-tied to a chair. Hugo laughed. Right, Dennis. Dennis appeared, cutting the zip ties with a knife. Blood rushed back into Nate's hands, painful and necessary. "Welcome to the team," Hugo said. "Let's go upstairs and get started." Nate stood on shaking legs, rubbing his wrists. He followed Hugo up the stairs, his mind already 3 steps ahead. Because Nate had lied, not about building the network. He would do that, make it look perfect. But while he built Hugo's fortress, he'd be building something else entirely. A trap, the kind that would take weeks to set up, require perfect timing, and depend on Hugo's arrogance blinding him to the danger. It was exactly the kind of plan that had brought down the Volkov syndicate. And it would work again. Chapter 5. The Double Game. The cabin's upper level had been converted into a tech hub that would make any hacker jealous. 6 monitors arranged in a semicircle, 3 high-end servers humming in a climate-controlled rack, enough bandwidth to suggest Hugo had run fiber optic cable out here somehow. Dennis unlocked a laptop and placed it in front of Nate. "This is your workstation," Hugo explained. "Air gap from the main network until I verify your work. You'll build the architecture here, test it in the sandbox environment, and when it's ready, we'll port it to the production systems." Nate booted up the laptop. Professional setup, Linux distribution, development tools already installed, clean file system. Someone who knew their way around cybersecurity had configured this. "Geneva did the setup," Hugo said, reading his expression. "She has a master's in computer science from MIT. Graduated 2 years before you did." Another surprise. Hugo's team wasn't just muscle. They were educated, skilled, dangerous in ways Nate was still discovering. "What's the scope?" Nate asked, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Hugo pulled up a chair. "I want a communication network that can be traced. Routing protocols that bounce through enough jurisdictions that even the FBI's cyber division can't track it. Encryption that makes signal look like a child's toy. And I want it modular, able to expand to 1,000 users without compromising security." That's ambitious. I have ambitious plans. My brother's empire was regional, mostly West Coast operations. I'm thinking global. Dark web marketplaces, cryptocurrency exchanges, information brokering. All of it untraceable back to me. Nate's fingers started moving across the keyboard, opening terminal windows, pulling up architecture diagrams. His mind was working on 2 levels. The surface level where he designed what Hugo wanted, and the deeper level where he planned the hidden vulnerabilities. "How long?" Hugo asked. 3 weeks for the core architecture. Another 2 to test and refine. 5 weeks total if nothing goes wrong. "You have 4. Nate nodded, already designing the first layers. He'd learned a crucial lesson during his undercover work. The best way to hide a trap was to build something genuinely excellent around it. Hugo's tech people would review his work, looking for obvious sabotage. They wouldn't find any, because Nate wasn't going to sabotage the network. He was going to make it so secure, so perfect, that Hugo would trust it completely. And then, when the time was right, Nate would use that trust to destroy him. The first 3 days passed in a blur of code and coffee. Hugo let him work mostly undisturbed, checking in twice a day to review progress. Dennis brought meals, always professional, always armed. Geneva appeared once, a quiet woman in her late 20s with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She reviewed Nate's encryption protocols, suggested improvements, even complimented his work. "You're better than I expected," she said. "The FBI cyber division was lucky to have you." "Thanks. Hugo says you're motivated by family." "That's good. Loyalty is important." She paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I hope this works out. I have nothing against you personally, but you'd kill me if Hugo ordered it." Without hesitation, she said it the way someone might comment on the weather. "It's not personal, it's operational." After she left, Nate stared at the code on his screen. These people, Hugo, Dennis, Geneva, they weren't cartoon villains. They were professionals with their own moral frameworks, their own loyalties. In another life, he might have worked alongside them. In this life, he was going to help bring them down. On the 4th night, Dennis brought him a phone. "Your wife wants to talk to you." Nate's heart jumped. He took the phone with shaking hands. "Miranda? Don't." Her voice was cold. "Don't say my name like that. Like we're still, like things are normal. I know they're not. I know I don't care what you know. I'm calling because Ella won't stop asking about you. She thinks you're dead. She cries herself to sleep every night. The words hit like punches. Can I talk to her? No, because I don't know what to tell her. How do I explain that her father is a liar? That everything she knew about our family was fake? Not everything. My love for you, for her, that was always real. Stop. Miranda's voice cracked. I can't do this. I can't listen to you try to make this okay. It's not okay. It will never be okay. I'm trying to fix this. I'm trying to. By working for a criminal? Shannon told me about the man watching our house. About the car that follows us to the grocery store. You think I don't know we're prisoners? Nate closed his eyes. 4 weeks. Give me 4 weeks, and I'll end this. Ow! I can't tell you. You have to trust me. Miranda laughed, bitter and broken. Trust you? After everything. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking anyway. Please, Miranda. For weeks. The silence stretched out. Then, Ella wants to know if you're coming home. Tell her yes. Tell her Daddy has to finish something important, but then I'm coming home. Don't make promises you can't keep. I've never broken a promise to her. I'm not starting now. Another pause. 4 weeks, Nate. Then I'm taking Ella somewhere you'll never find us. Somewhere Hugo Herring will never find us. And you'll let us go. Do you understand? Yes. Good. The line went dead. Nate handed the phone back to Dennis, who'd been listening the whole time. That sounded rough, Dennis said, almost sympathetically. Just let me work. For the next 2 weeks, Nate barely slept. He built the network layer by layer, each component perfect, each protocol tested and retested. And buried deep in the code, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look, he built his trap. It wasn't obvious. It was elegant. The network used a distributed architecture, hundreds of nodes bouncing traffic through a web of proxies. Standard dark web stuff, designed so that even if law enforcement found one node, they couldn't trace back to the source. But Nate added something special, a master key. It was hidden in the routing protocols, disguised as random variants in the ping times. To anyone analyzing the network, it looked like ordinary internet latency. But if you knew the pattern, a specific sequence of connection requests from a specific set of IP addresses, the network would log its own traffic. Every transaction, every message, every user, all of it time-stamped, geotagged, and stored in an encrypted file that would automatically upload to a dead-drop server the moment the master key was triggered. It was the same technique Nate had used to bring down the Volkov syndicate. And Hugo had no idea it was even possible. On day 18, Geneva reviewed the completed architecture. It's beautiful, she said, genuine admiration in her voice. The encryption layers alone would take the NSA months to crack. And the routing system, I've never seen anything this sophisticated. Will it pass muster? Hugo's bringing in an outside consultant. Former FSB, one of the best. If she signs off, we go live. The consultant arrived 2 days later. A woman in her 50s named Katrina Cooper, with cold eyes and a reputation for finding exploits in supposedly secure systems. She spent 3 days tearing apart Nate's work, looking for backdoors, vulnerabilities, hidden protocols. She found nothing, because there was nothing to find. The trap Nate had built wasn't a backdoor. It was a feature that looked like a bug that looked like random chance. It's clean, Katrina announced on the 3rd day. More than clean. This is world-class work. If this were legal, you could sell it for millions. Hugo was watching Nate carefully, looking for any sign of deception. Nate kept his face neutral, tired, resigned. Then we're ready? Hugo asked. One more test, Katrina said. Let me try to trace a transaction through the system in real time. If I can't track it, nobody can. They ran the test. Katrina used tools Nate had only read about in classified briefings. Traffic analysis software developed by intelligence agencies, AI-powered pattern recognition, even quantum computing simulations. Nothing worked. The network was a ghost. Congratulations, Katrina said to Nate. You've built something truly untraceable. Hugo smiled. Excellent. We'll go live tomorrow. That night, alone in the bedroom Hugo had given him, Nate used the small window of unsupervised computer access to send a message. It went through 7 proxy servers, encrypted with a cipher only one person would recognize. Russell Schwartz's phone buzzed at 3 a.m. with a single text from an unknown number. Cabin. Forest. Route 34. 4 weeks. Come heavy. The message deleted itself 30 seconds after delivery. Russell, 300 miles away in Portland, stared at his phone for a long moment. Then he started making calls. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The network went live on day 23. Hugo had already lined up clients. Dark web marketplaces hungry for secure communication. Cryptocurrency traders paranoid about surveillance. Even a few former Volkov syndicate members who'd survived the FBI raids and wanted back in the game. Nate watched the user count climb. 50, then 100, then 200. Each transaction logged. Each message captured. All of it invisible to everyone except him. You should be proud, Hugo said, standing behind Nate's chair as the monitors displayed network traffic. You've built something that will last decades. I built a prison for myself. No, you built freedom. For me, for my organization, for everyone who wants to operate outside government control. Hugo's hand landed on Nate's shoulder, heavy and possessive. And when this is all running smoothly, I'll keep my word. You can disappear, start over. Maybe rebuild things with Miranda. She won't take me back. Then you'll find someone else. You're still young, still talented. You could have a good life, Nate. All you have to do is accept what you've become. A traitor. A criminal. Everything he'd fought against. When do I get to leave? Soon. Let the network stabilize. Make sure there are no teething problems. Another week, maybe 2. Too long. Russell needed more time to gather resources, plan an assault. But Nate couldn't stall without raising suspicion. I want to see my daughter. Before I go. Hugo considered. 1 meeting. Supervised. I'll arrange it. 2 days later, Dennis drove Nate into Portland. The meet was set at a public park. Hugo's idea of safety through exposure. Geneva would be positioned nearby with a rifle. Any sign of law enforcement, and she'd start shooting into the crowd. Hugo knew Nate wouldn't risk civilian casualties. Ella was sitting on a swing. When Nate arrived, Miranda standing guard beside her. His daughter looked smaller than he remembered, her face pale and drawn. Miranda looked worse. Dark circles under her eyes, weight loss, the kind of exhaustion that came from weeks of fear. 20 minutes, Dennis said, staying by the car. And remember, we're watching. Nate walked to the swing set. Ella saw him and froze, then launched herself off the swing and ran. He caught her, lifting her up, feeling her small arms lock around his neck. Daddy, I was so scared. I know, baby. I know. I'm here now. Miranda watched with an expression Nate couldn't read. When he finally set Ella down, his daughter looked up at him with questions in her eyes. Are you still doing the bad thing? For the bad man. Trust a 7-year-old to cut through complexity. Yes, he admitted, but not for much longer. Daddy has a plan. Can you tell me? No, because you're smarter than I am, and if you know the plan, you might try to help. And I need you to stay safe. Ella processed this with the seriousness of a child who'd been forced to grow up too fast. Okay, but you have to promise you'll come back. I promise. Miranda spoke for the first time. Don't make promises you can't keep. I've never broken a promise to her. I won't start now. You broke every promise to me. Miranda's voice was controlled, but Nate could hear the rage underneath. In sickness and health, for better or worse, to love and honor. You broke them all the day you lied about who you were. I know. That's it. Just I know. You don't get to. She stopped, glancing at Ella. We shouldn't do this here. Then when, after this is over, will you give me a chance to explain? Explain what? How you built our entire life on a foundation of lies. How you used me as cover for your witness protection. There's nothing to explain, Nate. I understand perfectly. You don't understand everything. Then tell me. Right now. Tell me the one thing that makes this okay. Nate looked at his daughter, then back at Miranda. The night I proposed, I almost ran. Hugo was right about that. I had a bag packed, a ticket to Vancouver. I was going to disappear because the guilt was eating me alive. And I thought about you. About the way you laughed at my terrible jokes. The way you fell asleep reading on the couch. The way you made the world make sense. And I realized that everything I'd done, the undercover work, the testimony, all of it, I'd done because I believed in justice. in right and wrong. But loving you is the first time I'd done something just because it felt right. Not because it was tactical or strategic, just because you made me want to be better. Miranda's eyes were wet. That doesn't fix the lies. No, it doesn't. But means they weren't all lies. The man who married you, who held Ella for the first time, who built that tree house in the backyard, even though I had no idea what I was doing. He was real. He is real. That's me, Miranda. The rest was just context. Context that you hid from me. Yes. For 8 years. Yes. She turned away, wiping her eyes. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I should even try. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance. When this is over, when Hugo is dealt with and we're safe, I'm asking for one conversation. Just you and me. And if you still want to leave after that, I'll let you go. I'll sign whatever papers you want, give you whatever you need. But please, give me that one chance. Miranda was quiet for a long time. Finally, she nodded. One chance. But Nate, if you die doing whatever stupid thing you're planning, I will never forgive you. Do you understand? Ella needs your father. Even a lying, secretive, impossible father is better than a dead one. I understand. Dennis called out. Time's up. Nate knelt down, hugging Ella one more time. Be good for your mom. Do your homework. Don't hack into any more password-protected devices. Ella giggled through her tears. I'll try. He stood, looked at Miranda one last time, and walked back to the car. As Dennis drove away, Nate watched his family shrink in the rearview mirror. Miranda had her arms around Ella, both of them watching the car leave. Touching, Dennis said. Almost makes me feel bad about what happens next. Nate's attention snapped forward. What happens next? Hugo didn't tell you? We're expanding operations. The network's been so successful that we're bringing in some of Alexei's old partners. The ones who got out before the FBI raids. They're flying in tomorrow for a strategy session. At the cabin? Where else? Hugo wants to show off your handiwork. Prove that the Herring organization is the future. This was it. The moment Nate had been waiting for. Not just Hugo and his core team, but multiple high-value targets in one location. If Russell was ready, if the plan worked, they could take down a significant chunk of the criminal network in one move. But it also meant more security, more guards, more ways for things to go wrong. When they got back to the cabin, Nate found Hugo in the tech room, reviewing user analytics. You met with your family, Hugo said without looking up. How was it? Painful. Good. Pain is clarifying. Hugo pulled up a new screen. These are our guests for tomorrow. I want you to meet them, show them the network, explain how it works. Think of it as a sales presentation. Nate scanned the names. Most were familiar from his FBI days, mid-level players who'd avoided prosecution by being careful or lucky. But one name stood out. Elias Mann. Alexei Volkov's chief financial officer, the man who'd managed the money flows, covered the tracks, made the empire run. He'd disappeared the day before the FBI raids, vanished so completely that even Nate's investigation couldn't find him. Elias is coming here? He's been in Argentina for 8 years. But he wants back in the game, and he has capital to invest. Hugo smiled. Between his money and my ambition, we're going to build something bigger than my brother ever imagined. Nate kept his expression neutral. Sound impressive. It will be. And you made it possible. Hugo stood, clapping Nate on the shoulder. After tomorrow, once the partnership is formalized, you're free to go. I'll stage your death, car accident, probably, and you can disappear. Start over. Just like that. Just like that. You built what I needed. You kept your word. I'll keep mine. It sounded too easy. Hugo wasn't sentimental, but he also wasn't stupid. Would he really let Nate walk away with all this knowledge? No, he wouldn't. Which meant tomorrow was the end game for both of them. That night, Nate used his brief computer access to send one final message to Russell. Tomorrow. Noon. 8 targets. Armed. Come ready. Then he deleted every trace of the message and prepared for war. Chapter 7. The Convergence. The morning arrived with fog rolling through the forest, thick enough that Nate could barely see the tree line from the cabin windows. Perfect conditions for an assault. Russell would appreciate that. Hugo had transformed the cabin's main room into a conference space. 8 chairs around a long table, presentation screen at one end, coffee service set up like this was a legitimate business meeting. The absurdity would have been funny if the stakes weren't so high. The guests started arriving at 10 a.m. Elias Mann came first, stepping out of a Mercedes SUV with 2 bodyguards flanking him. He was older than his photos suggested, silver-haired and distinguished, wearing an Italian suit that probably cost more than Nate's car. Nothing about him suggested criminal. He looked like a banker, which was exactly what he'd been for the Volkov syndicate. "Nathan," Elias said, extending his hand. "Or should I call you Nate now? I must say, I never expected to see you working for Hugo. Life takes strange turns." "It does. No hard feelings about the testimony, I hope. You were just doing your job." "I respect that." The ease with which he said it was chilling. 8 years ago, Nate's testimony had helped dismantle Elias's entire operation. And now here he was, smiling like they were old colleagues. The others arrived in clusters. Nate recognized 4 of them from FBI briefings. Mid-level operators who'd specialized in money laundering, identity fraud, weapons trafficking. The last 2 were new faces, probably recruited from Elias's Argentina operation. By 11:30, everyone was assembled. Hugo stood at the head of the table, confidence radiating from him. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming. What I'm about to show you will revolutionize how we operate. No more worrying about FBI surveillance. No more paranoia about encrypted communications being cracked. Nate Romero has built us something unprecedented." All eyes turned to Nate. He felt the weight of their attention, the calculation behind their smiles. These were men who'd built careers on ruthlessness and paranoia. They wouldn't trust easily. "Show them," Hugo said. Nate pulled up the network interface on the presentation screen. This is a distributed communication network using military-grade encryption and quantum-resistant algorithms. Every message is fragmented, encrypted at the source, routed through a minimum of 50 proxy servers across 30 countries, and reassembled only at the destination. He walked them through the architecture, explaining the security features, demonstrating the impossibility of tracing traffic. Geneva had set up a live demonstration. 2 users in different countries exchanging messages that appeared as random noise to anyone monitoring the network. "The FBI can't crack this?" Elias asked. "They could, given unlimited time and resources. But by the time they decrypt one message, the routing protocols have already shifted. It's like trying to catch smoke. And the cost? Minimal. The infrastructure is already built. You just pay for access. Hugo can discuss the terms." Elias leaned back, impressed. "This is exactly what we need. With this kind of security, we could coordinate operations across continents. No more isolation, no more working in cells. This is a force multiplier." The others nodded agreement. Hugo was glowing with satisfaction. "Then we have a deal?" Hugo asked. "We have the framework of a deal," Elias corrected. "But I'd like my technical people to review the system. Standard due diligence." "Of course. Geneva can." The lights went out. For a moment, everyone sat in darkness. Then emergency generators kicked in, bathing the room in dim red emergency lighting. "What the hell?" Dennis was on his feet, gun out. Hugo's expression had gone cold. "Geneva, report." Geneva's voice came through on the radio. "Someone cut the main power line. I'm repositioning to." Gunfire erupted outside. Not wild spray and pray, but controlled 3-round bursts. "Professional shooting. Contact." Geneva's voice was sharp. "Multiple hostiles approaching from the north. I count 5. No, 7. Shit, they're flanking." More gunfire. Then silence. "Geneva." Dennis was already moving toward the door. "Everyone stay calm," Hugo commanded. "Dennis, take 2 men and secure the perimeter. Elias, get your bodyguards positioned. This might be law enforcement, might be a rival crew. Either way, we're not getting caught." But Nate knew the truth. This was Russell. The question was whether Russell had brought enough people to make this work. More gunfire outside, closer now. Someone was screaming. Through the window, Nate saw muzzle flashes in the fog, short, controlled bursts from the north and west. Russell had brought at least 2 teams, maybe more. Hugo grabbed Nate, pulling him close. "Did you do this? Did you call them?" "I've been under surveillance 24/7. When would I have called anyone?" It was technically true. The messages had been sent days ago. Hugo shoved them away. If this is the FBI, that network of yours just became evidence. You better pray it's not. But it wasn't the FBI. Russell had retired 5 years ago, but he still had connections. Former military operators, private security contractors, men who owed him favors. Men who'd come when he called, no questions asked. The cabin door burst open. Dennis stumbled in, blood streaming from shoulder wound. They're everywhere, he gasped. Professional team, military-grade equipment. They took out Geneva, disabled the vehicles. We're pinned. Elias was already moving toward the back of the cabin. Is there another exit? Root cellar, Hugo said. This way. They moved as a group, Hugo leading, Elias's bodyguards bringing up the rear. But Nate hung back, watching the chaos unfold. Through the window, he saw figures moving through the fog. Tactical gear, suppressed weapons, perfect coordination. Russell had brought his A-team. One of the figures looked up at the window. Even through the fog, Nate recognized him. Russell Schwartz, older and grayer than 8 years ago, but still moving like the Marine he'd once been. He saw Nate, gave a tiny nod, and signaled to his team. They were breaching the cabin. Nate had seconds to decide. Follow Hugo and the others into the root cellar. Try to maintain his cover, or break away now. Trust Russell to handle it? Romero. Hugo was at the cellar entrance. Move! A flashbang exploded through the front window. The world went white and silent. When Nate's vision cleared, Russell's team was inside, moving with precision. 4 men, all armed with assault rifles, clearing the room with professional efficiency. Russell pointed at Nate. Down. On the floor now. Nate dropped, hands behind his head. Played the captive. The team secured the main room in seconds, then moved toward the cellar entrance. But Hugo had already disappeared below, dragging Elias and the others with him. Russell knelt beside Nate, keeping his rifle trained on the cellar entrance. You okay? Yeah. Hugo's got 8 people down there, all armed. It's going to be a bloodbath if you breach. Not planning to breach. We got something better. He pulled a remote detonator from his vest. When you sent me the location, I had 3 days to prep. We wired the cellar with enough gas to put everyone to sleep for 6 hours. Non-lethal, mostly. You might want to hold your breath. He pressed the button. A soft hiss echoed from below. Then shouting. Then coughing. Then silence. Give it 90 seconds, Russell said. They waited. The fog outside was starting to clear, revealing the bodies of Hugo's security team scattered around the perimeter. Russell's people had been brutally efficient. After 2 minutes, Russell's team descended into the cellar, gas masks on. They emerged dragging unconscious bodies. Hugo, Elias, Dennis, all the others. Zip-tied and neutralized. Is it done? Nate asked. Not even close. Russell pulled him to his feet. We've got Hugo and his crew, but the network is still running. You need to trigger that master key you built in. Log everything. Give us the evidence we need to round up the users. Nate moved to the laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. The sequence was complex, disguised in the normal network traffic patterns. But he designed it, and he knew exactly where to press. The master key activated. Across the world, in 30 countries, the network began logging its own traffic. Every message, every transaction, every user, all of it captured and uploaded to the dead drop server Russell's FBI contacts would access. How many users? Russell asked. Last count was 400 and change. You're looking at the entire dark web criminal network for the Western Hemisphere. Russell whistled. The FBI is going to throw you a parade. The FBI thinks I'm in witness protection in Oregon. Yeah, about that. Russell pulled out his phone, showing Nate a message. I called in some favors. Your protection status is being reinstated, full security clearance restored. And there's a job offer waiting for you. Cybercrimes Division, senior analyst position. If you want it. Nate looked at the unconscious form of Hugo Herring, zip-tied and helpless on the floor. 8 years of planning, months of rage and revenge, all ended in 90 seconds of sleeping gas. What about the others? The people Hugo brought in, already being rounded up. We've got teams coordinating with Interpol, FBI, local agencies. By tomorrow morning, every person who used that network will be in custody or on the run. It was over. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The FBI descended on the cabin like locusts. Trucks full of evidence technicians, cyber specialists, even a mobile command center that's set up in the clearing. Hugo and his crew were transported to a federal holding facility in Portland, each one facing charges that would put them away for life. Nate spent 16 hours being debriefed. Every detail of the past 4 weeks, every conversation with Hugo, every line of code in the network. The assistant director of cybercrimes personally thanked him for the biggest dark web takedown in FBI history. 463 arrests, she said, showing him the tally on her tablet. Money launderers, arms dealers, drug traffickers, human smugglers. You just cleared our case backlog for the next 3 years. I just built a network, Nate said. You build a trap. There's a difference. She offered him the job Russell had mentioned. Senior analyst, full benefits, relocation assistance if he wanted to move back to D.C. A chance to return to the work he'd left behind 8 years ago. Nate said he'd think about it. What he really needed was to see his family. Miranda was still in Portland, staying at her sister's house. Shannon Hickman had been briefed by FBI agents, understood enough to know that Nate wasn't the villain she'd assumed. But understanding didn't mean forgiving. When Nate knocked on Shannon's door, it was Ella who answered. She looked at him for a moment, then launched herself into his arms. You came back. You promised, and you came back. I'll always come back for you, sweetheart. Always. Miranda appeared in the hallway, Shannon behind her. His wife looked exhausted, wary, but she wasn't running. Can we talk? Nate asked. Miranda nodded. Shannon, can you take Ella to the park? Of course. Come on, kiddo. Let's go feed the ducks. When they were alone, Miranda led him to the living room. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, a distance that felt like miles. The FBI told me what you did, Miranda said. About the network, the trap, all of it. They said you helped take down hundreds of criminals. I had help. They also said you risked your life. That if Hugo had figured out what you were doing, he would have killed you. Probably. And you did it anyway. Her eyes were red. Why? Why couldn't you just run? Take us somewhere safe and let someone else deal with Hugo. Because running wouldn't have stopped him. He'd have found us eventually. And because Nate stopped, choosing his words carefully. Because 8 years ago, I made a choice to fight for something bigger than myself. I brought down the Volkov Syndicate because it was the right thing to do, even though it meant hiding who I was. And I couldn't stop being that person just because it was inconvenient. Even if it cost you your family, I was trying to save my family. You and Ella, you're everything to me. But I also couldn't let Hugo rebuild what his brother started. Too many people would have gotten hurt. Miranda was quiet for a long time. I want to hate you. For the lies, the secrets, the danger you brought into our lives. I want to pack Ella up and disappear. Start fresh somewhere you can't find us. You should. You'd be better off. Don't tell me what I should do. There was fire in her voice now. You don't get to make decisions for me. Not anymore. You're right. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. I don't want apologies, Nate. I want the truth. All of it. No more secrets. No more classified information you can't share. If there's any chance of fixing this, I need to know everything. So Nate told her. He started at the beginning with his recruitment into the FBI straight out of MIT. Told her about his first undercover assignment, the fear and adrenaline, the way he'd learned to become someone else. Told her about the Volkov Syndicate, about Alexei and the empire he'd built, about the 3 years Nate had spent living a lie. He told her about Marcus Petrov, the 17-year-old who'd hanged himself in juvenile detention, about the nightmares Nate still had sometimes, the faces of people he'd helped put away, about the guilt that never quite faded. And he told her about meeting her, about the coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday, about the way she'd laughed when he'd spilled his drink trying to ask for her number, about falling in love so completely that it terrified him. I should have told you before we got married, he said. I know that, but I was scared you'd run, scared I'd lose the one real thing in my life. So you lied instead. Yes, and I'm sorry. I'll be sorry for the rest of my life. But I can't change it, Miranda. All I can do is promise that from now on, there are no more secrets, no more lies. Just me, exactly as I am, for better or worse. Miranda wiped her eyes. The FBI offered you a job. How did you? Shannon's husband is a lawyer. He made some calls, found out what was happening. They want you in D.C. working cybercrimes. I turned it down. Miranda looked surprised. Why? Because I'm done choosing the job over everything else. If you'll let me, I want to come back. Not to D.C., not to some new life. Back to Riverside, back to our house, back to being Ella's dad and your husband. I'll find work. Regular work, nothing classified. IT consulting, network security, whatever keeps us stable. And if Hugo's people come after you, they won't. Hugo's looking at life without parole, same as Elias and the others. Their organization is finished. The FBI seized all their assets, froze all their accounts. They're done. You can't guarantee that. No, but I can promise I'll never put you and Ella in danger again. If there's even a hint of trouble, we'll have FBI protection, relocation, whatever it takes. Miranda stood, pacing to the window. Outside, Shannon was pushing Ella on a swing, both of them laughing. Normal. Safe. Everything Nate wanted to give them. I need time, Miranda said finally, to process this, to figure out if I can trust you again. It's not something I can decide in one conversation. I understand, but I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need to see who you are now. The real you, not Nathan Rodriguez or Nate Romero, but whoever you actually are underneath all the identities. I don't know if I know anymore. Then we'll figure it out together. Maybe. She turned to face him. One condition, family therapy. All three of us. We're not doing this alone. Agreed. And you tell Ella the truth. Age-appropriate truth, but she deserves to know who her father really is. I'll tell her. Miranda crossed him, stopping just out of reach. This doesn't mean we're okay. It doesn't mean I've forgiven you. But it means I'm willing to try. Nate stood. That's more than I deserve. A lot more. But she was almost smiling. Don't make me regret it. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 6 months later, Nate stood in the backyard of their Riverside house, watching Ella demonstrate her science fair project for the judges. She'd built a working model of a quantum computer, ridiculously advanced for a 7-year-old, but that was Ella. Miranda stood beside him, her hand in his, both of them beaming with pride. The past half year had been hard. Therapy sessions where they dug into the wreckage of trust, long conversations about who they wanted to be moving forward, moments of doubt when it seemed easier to just give up. But they kept at it. Nate had taken a job with a legitimate cybersecurity firm in Portland, consulting for businesses that needed network protection. The work was honest, legal, and boring in the best possible way. He came home every night by 6, helped with homework, coached Ella's soccer team. Hugo Herring was serving life without parole in a Supermax facility in Colorado. Dennis and Geneva had taken plea deals, testifying against the others in exchange for reduced sentences. Elias Mann had fled to Argentina, but was caught trying to board a plane to Paraguay. The entire organization had been dismantled. Russell visited once a month, usually bringing his daughter to play with Ella. He'd retired for good this time, bought a fishing boat, talked about writing a memoir. He and Nate never discussed the cabin, the assault, the night everything changed. They didn't need to. She's going to win, Miranda said, squeezing Nate's hand. Probably. She's terrifying. She gets it from you. I'm choosing to take that as a compliment. Miranda laughed, and the sound was like sunlight. They found their way back to laughter, to trust, to something that felt like the beginning of forgiveness. Ella's presentation ended to enthusiastic applause. She ran over, practically vibrating with excitement. They said my quantum theory was remarkably sophisticated for my age bracket, and Mr. Henderson said he'd never seen a 7-year-old explain Heisenberg's uncertainty principle so clearly. That's amazing, sweetheart, Nate said, lifting her up. I'm so proud of you. Are we still getting ice cream after? Double scoop. You earned it. As they walked to the car, Nate felt Miranda's hand slip back into his. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. That night, after Ella was asleep and the house was quiet, Nate and Miranda sat on the back porch, watching stars emerge through the Oregon clouds. I've been thinking, Miranda said, about what the therapist said, about building new memories to replace the old ones. Yeah, I think we should take a trip. All three of us. somewhere we've never been together. Make new memories that belong to all of us, not to Nathan Rodriguez or Nate Romero, but to our family. Where would you want to go? Anywhere. Everywhere. Ella's obsessed with volcanoes right now. Maybe Hawaii? We could see the lava flows, go to the observatory, let her geek out about geological formations. Nate smiled. That sounds perfect. It does, doesn't it? Miranda leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm not saying everything's fixed. There are still days when I remember the lies and I get angry all over again. But there are also days when I look at you and see the man I fell in love with. And those days are starting to outnumber the angry ones. I'll take it. You better. Because I'm not going through this again. This is it, Nate. One more lie, one more secret, and we're done. I mean it. I know. No more lies. No more secrets. Just us. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Inside, Ella's nightlight glowed softly in her window. The house was quiet, safe, normal. Everything Nate had fought for. The next morning, a package arrived. No return address, just Nate's name in neat handwriting. Inside was a single item, a prepaid phone with one message already loaded. You did good work on that network. If you ever want to come back to the field, call this number. The world needs people like you. AD, the assistant director of cybercrimes, offering him another chance at the life he'd left behind. Nate looked at the phone for a long moment, thought about the adrenaline, the puzzle solving, the satisfaction of taking down bad guys. Thought about everything he'd sacrificed for that life. Then he thought about Ella's laughter, about Miranda's hand in his, about ordinary Tuesday nights watching terrible reality TV on the couch. He put the phone in his pocket, walked outside, and dropped it in the trash can. Some doors you closed and walked away from. Some lives you chose to leave behind. This was his life now. Miranda, Ella, the boring job, the soccer practices, the science fair projects. Real, honest, built on truth instead of lies. And for the first time in his adult life, Nate Romero was exactly where he wanted to be. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life's Facade. Curtis Robertson stood in his marble-floored foyer, adjusting his Armani tie as he prepared for another day at his private security consulting firm. At 42, he had built an empire from nothing, a company that provided high-end protection services to Fortune 500 executives and celebrities. His steel-gray eyes reflected the same intensity that had made him a decorated Marine before transitioning to civilian life. The sprawling estate in Malibu Hills was a testament to his success. Kristen, his wife of 15 years, descended the grand staircase in a flowing silk dress, her auburn hair perfectly styled. At 38, she still turned heads wherever she went, and Curtis felt a familiar surge of pride. Their son, Tommy, a bright 14-year-old, was already at his private academy. Another late night at the office? Kristen asked, her voice carrying a subtle edge that Curtis attributed to the stress of planning their anniversary party next month. The Henderson contract needs finalizing, Curtis replied, kissing her forehead. This deal alone will net us 8 figures. Kristen's smile seemed forced, but Curtis dismissed it. His business demanded absolute focus, and he'd always trusted his wife to handle their domestic life. She'd never given him reason to doubt her loyalty, or so he believed. Curtis had met Kristen at a charity gala 16 years ago. She was a struggling artist then, working part-time at an upscale gallery. He'd been immediately drawn to her passion for life and her genuine warmth. Their courtship was intense and brief. Within 6 months, they were married in a lavish ceremony that made the society pages. What Curtis didn't know was that Kristen had grown resentful over the years. She felt like a trophy wife, beautiful but ultimately decorative in Curtis's empire. Her art career had withered as she played the role of the perfect executive's wife. The loneliness had created a void that someone else was now filling. That someone was Trevor Hatfield, a 35-year-old personal trainer who worked at the exclusive club where Kristen spent her afternoons. Trevor was everything Curtis wasn't: carefree, spontaneous, and completely focused on her when they were together. He was also dangerous in ways Kristen couldn't imagine. Trevor had a history that would have sent Curtis into a calculated rage. Born into poverty, Trevor had clawed his way up through various schemes and manipulations. He'd targeted wealthy, lonely wives before, but Kristen represented the ultimate prize. Through her, he'd gained access to information about Curtis's clients, security protocols, and most importantly, the family's financial assets. As Curtis drove his black Porsche toward downtown Los Angeles, he was mentally reviewing the Henderson contract details. James Henderson, a tech mogul, had received credible death threats and needed Curtis's most sophisticated protection package. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes, high-reward case that energized Curtis. Meanwhile, back at the Robertson estate, Kristen was preparing for another afternoon with Trevor. She'd told Curtis she was attending a museum board meeting, but instead, she was meeting her lover at a discreet hotel in Beverly Hills. The lies came easier now, after 8 months of deception. Trevor had been pushing for more than just an affair. He wanted Kristen to leave Curtis, but more importantly, he wanted access to Curtis's business accounts and client information. Trevor had connections with some very dangerous people, mercenaries and criminals who would pay handsomely for the kind of intelligence Curtis's company possessed. That evening, Curtis returned home earlier than usual, hoping to spend time with Tommy before dinner. He found his son in the gaming room, focused intently on his computer. "How was school, champ?" Curtis asked, settling into the leather chair beside his son. Tommy looked up, his expression troubled. "Dad, I need to tell you something." Before Tommy could continue, Kristen appeared in the doorway. "Dinner's ready," she announced, her timing conveniently interrupting the conversation. Curtis noticed the quick glance between his wife and son, a silent communication that set off his internal alarm system. Years of security work had honed his instincts for deception, but he'd never thought to apply them to his own family. "What did you want to tell me, Tommy?" Curtis pressed. "It's nothing important, Dad. Just school stuff," Tommy mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Curtis let it go for the moment, but filed the interaction away. Something was building in his household, and his instincts were telling him to pay attention. As they sat down for dinner, Curtis studied his family with new eyes. Kristen seemed nervous, constantly checking her phone. Tommy kept glancing at his mother with what looked like disappointment or even anger. The perfect family tableau was cracking, and Curtis began to wonder what lay beneath the surface. That night, as Kristen slept beside him, Curtis stared at the ceiling, processing the subtle signs he'd been unconsciously noting for weeks. The late returns from errands, the new clothes and jewelry she claimed were gifts from friends, the way she'd become protective of her phone. His methodical mind began assembling a case against his own wife. Chapter 2. The Brother's Warning. 3 weeks later, Curtis was putting the finishing touches on the Henderson security detail when his half-brother Benny Ross called. Benny, 5 years younger and a detective with the LAPD, rarely contacted Curtis during business hours unless it was urgent. "Curtis, we need to talk. In person. Tonight." Benny's voice carried a gravity that immediately put Curtis on alert. "What's going on?" "Not over the phone. Meet me at Murphy's Pub on Sunset at 8. Curtis arrived at Murphy's to find Benny already nursing a whiskey, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by grim concern. Benny had always been the more emotional of the two brothers, while Curtis was calculating and controlled. Despite their different approaches to life, they'd maintained a close bond since their mother remarried when Curtis was 12. "Remember when you asked me to run a background check on that trainer at Kristen's club?" Benny began without preamble. Curtis's blood chilled. He'd made that request casually 3 weeks ago, more out of professional habit than suspicion. "Trevor Hatfield. What did you find?" "More than you want to know." Benny slid a manila folder across the table. "Trevor Hatfield isn't his real name. He's actually Trevor Galvin, and he's got a record. Identity theft, fraud, and suspicion of involvement in 2 home invasions where wealthy wives were specifically targeted." Curtis opened the folder, his expression remaining neutral even as rage began building inside him. Photos, police reports, and financial records painted a picture of a sophisticated predator who targeted affluent women for information and access to their family's wealth. "There's more," Benny continued. "I've been doing some unofficial surveillance. Kristen's been meeting with him regularly. Hotels, restaurants, his apartment. And yesterday, I saw him photographing the security system at your house while she distracted the guard." The pub's ambient noise faded as Curtis processed this information. His wife wasn't just having an affair. She was collaborating with a criminal who was gathering intelligence about his home and business. The betrayal cut deeper than simple infidelity. It was a violation of everything he'd built and protected. "There's something else," Benny said reluctantly. "Tommy knows. I saw him following Kristen last week. The kid's been tracking his mother's movements." Curtis's hands clenched into fists. His son had been trying to tell him something for weeks, and Curtis had been too focused on business to listen. Now Tommy was carrying the burden of his mother's betrayal alone. "How long do I have?" Curtis asked, his voice deadly calm. "Trevor's been asking Kristen specific questions about your client list and security protocols. I think they're planning something big. Maybe a coordinated attack on one of your clients, using inside information." Curtis closed the folder and stood up. "Thank you for bringing this to me." "Curtis, what are you going to do?" The look Curtis gave his brother was one Benny had seen before, in the eyes of Marines about to enter combat. "I'm going to handle it." That night, Curtis drove home with his mind already formulating a plan. He wouldn't simply divorce Kristen and have Trevor arrested. That would be too easy, too clean. They had violated his trust, endangered his son, and threatened his life's work. The punishment needed to match the crime. As he pulled into his driveway, Curtis made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't confront them directly. Instead, he would let them continue their plan while he prepared his own. The art of warfare, which he'd mastered in the Marines and perfected in business, would now be applied to a very personal battlefield. Curtis entered his house to find Kristen in the living room, reading a book. She looked up with a smile that now seemed like a mask to him. "How was your evening with Benny?" she asked. "Fine. Just catching up," Curtis replied, settling into his chair with practiced normalcy. "How was your day?" "Oh, the usual. Museum committee work, lunch with the girls." Every word felt like a knife twist, but Curtis's expression remained unchanged. He was already thinking several moves ahead, planning an elaborate game where Kristen and Trevor would be the unwilling participants in their own destruction. "I think I'll work from home tomorrow," Curtis announced casually. "Spend some time with Tommy." He caught the flash of panic in Kristen's eyes before she recovered. "That's wonderful. He's been wanting more time with you." As Curtis headed upstairs, he was already mentally drafting the first phase of his revenge. They wanted to play games with his life. He would show them what a real predator looked like when cornered. Chapter 3. The Son's Burden. The next morning, Curtis waited until Kristen left for her museum committee meeting before approaching Tommy. He found his son in the backyard, shooting baskets with an intensity that suggested he was working through frustration. "Can we talk?" Curtis asked, sitting on the pool deck. Tommy stopped dribbling and looked at his father with eyes that seemed older than his 14 years. "About Mom." The directness of the question confirmed Curtis's suspicions. "What do you know?" Tommy sat beside his father, staring at the basketball in his hands. "I've been following her sometimes. I know about the guy, Trevor. I've seen them together." Curtis felt a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Pride that his son had the instincts to recognize deception. Heartbreak that the boy had been forced to confront such ugly realities about his mother. "How long have you known?" 3 months. "At first, I thought maybe they were just friends, but then I saw them." Tommy's voice trailed off. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I hoped it would stop. I thought maybe Mom would remember that she loves us and end it." Tommy's voice cracked slightly. "But it's getting worse. She's telling him things about your work, about our house. I heard them talking about your clients." Curtis placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did nothing wrong. This is not your responsibility. What are you going to do?" Curtis studied his son's face, seeing maturity beyond his years. Tommy deserved the truth, or at least part of it. "I'm going to protect this family." But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say when I say it. Can you do that? Tommy nodded solemnly. Are you going to hurt them? The question hung in the air. Curtis could have lied, could have offered comforting platitudes about handling things through proper channels. Instead, he chose honesty. I'm going to make sure they can never hurt us again. That afternoon, while Kristen was at her rendezvous with Trevor, Curtis began implementing his plan. He started by installing additional surveillance equipment throughout the house, cameras and recording devices that Kristen and Trevor wouldn't detect. He wanted documentation of everything. Next, he called his most trusted employee, Omar Shannon, a former Navy SEAL who handled Curtis's most sensitive operations. Omar had been with the company for 8 years and had proven his loyalty repeatedly. I need a complete workup on Trevor Galvin, also known as Trevor Hatfield, Curtis told Omar. Everything. Financial records, associates, current operations, weaknesses. I also need surveillance on him and my wife. Full coverage. Omar asked no questions. In their line of work, personal security sometimes became very personal indeed. Curtis then contacted Jeffrey Galvin, ironically sharing a surname with Trevor, though no relation, who was his company's legal counsel and strategist. Jeffrey specialized in complex scenarios where multiple moving parts needed coordination. I need to restructure some assets, Curtis told Jeffrey. Quietly, I want certain accounts moved, properties transferred, and a new will drafted. Make it look like routine financial planning. By evening, Curtis had set multiple operations in motion. The hidden cameras were already capturing Kristen's nervous behavior as she prepared for another lie-filled evening. The surveillance on Trevor had begun, and Curtis's assets were being quietly repositioned. When Kristen returned home that evening, she seemed more agitated than usual. Curtis suspected Trevor was pressuring her for more information or faster action on whatever they were planning. Everything all right? Curtis asked over dinner. Just tired. The committee work is more demanding than I expected. Tommy shot his mother a look of pure disgust that she didn't catch, but Curtis did. His son was struggling with the knowledge of his mother's betrayal, and Curtis knew that Kristen's continued lies were only making it worse. That night, Curtis accessed the surveillance feeds from his home office. He watched Kristen make a phone call from their bedroom, speaking in hushed tones. The audio pickup was clear enough to hear her side of the conversation. He's getting suspicious. I think Tommy might have said something. Yes, I can get the client files, but we need to move faster. How much longer do I have to keep this up? Curtis saved the recording and added it to his growing file of evidence. But evidence wasn't his end game. It was just ammunition for what was coming. Over the next several days, Curtis maintained his normal routine while his team gathered intelligence. Omar's reports painted a picture of Trevor as a man with significant debts to dangerous people. He owed money to loan sharks connected to organized crime, and his scheme with Kristen was apparently his plan to pay them back. More disturbing was the revelation that Trevor had been in contact with known criminals who specialized in high-end home invasions. The plan wasn't just to steal Curtis's client information. They were planning to rob the Robertson estate while making it look like a random crime. Kristen would be the surviving victim who could provide them with security codes and asset locations. Curtis realized that his wife wasn't just betraying him. She was actively participating in a plan that could have resulted in his and Tommy's deaths. The revelation crystallized his resolve. This wasn't just about adultery anymore. It was about survival. As Curtis prepared for bed that night, he looked at Kristen sleeping peacefully beside him. She had no idea that her husband knew everything, or that he was planning a response that would be both creative and devastating. In Curtis's mind, the game had already begun. Kristen and Trevor thought they were the hunters, but they were about to learn what it felt like to be prey. Chapter 4. The Hunt Begins. Curtis spent the following week gathering intelligence while maintaining the facade of normalcy. Omar's surveillance revealed that Trevor had 3 associates. Ricky Hartman, a former burglar with expertise in high-end security systems. Mario Knight, a violent enforcer with connections to organized crime. And Wendell Camacho, a technical specialist who handled electronic surveillance and communications. The plan they were developing was more sophisticated than Curtis had initially imagined. They intended to stage a home invasion during the upcoming anniversary party, when the house would be full of wealthy guests. Kristen would ensure that certain security measures were accidentally disabled, and the crew would make off with cash, jewelry, and most importantly, Curtis's encrypted client files. But Curtis was already 3 steps ahead. He began his countermove by feeding Kristen false information about the anniversary party, changing security protocols, and relocating his most sensitive files to a location she couldn't access. "I've decided to move the party to next weekend," Curtis announced over breakfast one Thursday morning. Kristen's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Next weekend? But I've already confirmed with the caterers for the 15th. Change it. I need to accommodate the Henderson family schedule." Curtis watched her carefully. "They're flying in specifically for our celebration." The mention of the Henderson family, his most high-profile clients, made Kristen's eyes light up with an avarice that disgusted Curtis. He could practically see her calculating the additional wealth that would be present. That afternoon, while Kristen was supposedly at the museum, Curtis met with his core team at a secure location. Omar had brought detailed surveillance photos and recordings that painted a complete picture of the conspiracy. Trevor's been asking Kristen specific questions about guest lists, security rotations, and safe locations, Omar reported. He's also been photographing the exterior of the house from multiple angles. Jeffrey, Curtis's lawyer, spread out financial documents across the conference table. "I've completed the asset transfers as requested. If something happens to you, or if divorce proceedings begin, Kristen will find that her access to marital assets is extremely limited." Curtis studied the surveillance photos of his wife meeting with Trevor. In one image, she was handing him what appeared to be a key. "That's my home office," Curtis realized. She's given him access to everything. "There's more," Omar continued. "We've identified their meeting location, a warehouse in Long Beach. It appears to be their staging area." Curtis made a decision that would set the final phase of his plan in motion. "I want you to arrange for some additional guests at the anniversary party. People who won't be on the official guest list." Omar understood immediately. How many? Enough to handle 4 men who think they're professionals, but have never faced real professionals. That evening, Curtis found Tommy in his room, ostensibly doing homework, but clearly distracted. "How are you holding up?" Tommy looked up from his textbook. "It's hard, pretending everything's normal. Watching her lie to you every day." Curtis sat on the bed beside his son. "I need to tell you something important. Next weekend, during the party, some dangerous things might happen. I'm going to handle it, but I need you to be ready to do exactly what I tell you." "What kind of dangerous things?" "The kind that mean you'll need to stay close to Uncle Benny and do whatever he says without question." Tommy nodded gravely. At 14, he was old enough to understand that his father was preparing for something serious. "Dad, are you going to be okay?" Curtis looked at his son, truly looked at him, and saw a young man who had been forced to grow up too quickly because of his mother's choices. "I'm going to be fine. But after next weekend, our family is going to look very different." "Different how?" "Your mother won't be living here anymore." Tommy was quiet for a long moment. "Good," he finally said, and Curtis heard the cold finality in his son's voice that reminded him of himself. Meanwhile, at the warehouse in Long Beach, Trevor was briefing his crew on the final details of their plan. The anniversary party represented the perfect opportunity. Dozens of wealthy guests, predictable security routines, and Kristen's inside knowledge of the house layout. "The security rotation changes at 11:30, Trevor explained, pointing to a blueprint of the Robertson estate that Kristen had provided. "That gives us a 15-minute window when the rear perimeter is minimally covered." Ricky Hartman studied the security schematics. "These systems are high-end, military grade. That's where our inside information becomes invaluable." Trevor smiled. "Kristen will ensure that key sensors are offline for maintenance during the crucial window." What none of them knew was that Curtis had already changed every security protocol they thought they understood. The sensors Kristen believed she could disable had been replaced. The rotation schedules had been altered. Most importantly, the wealthy guests would include some very dangerous men who were prepared for exactly this kind of situation. Mario Knight, the enforcer, seemed nervous. "This Robertson guy, He's ex-military, right? And his company provides security for some heavy hitters. He's a businessman now. Trevor dismissed the concern. Soft. Comfortable. He'll fold when he sees real violence. Trevor's assessment would prove to be a fatal miscalculation. Curtis Robertson had never been soft, and comfort had never made him careless. If anything, having something precious to protect had made him more dangerous than he'd ever been in the Marines. As Curtis prepared for bed that night, he reflected on how perfectly his enemies had positioned themselves for destruction. They thought they were hunting him, but they had actually walked into a trap that had been months in the making. Tomorrow, he would make the final preparations. And next weekend, Kristen and Trevor would learn the true meaning of betrayal. Chapter 5. The Trap is Set. The morning of the anniversary party, Curtis awoke before dawn and found Kristen already up, pacing nervously in their bedroom. She was fully dressed despite the early hour, her hands shaking slightly as she applied her makeup. "You're up early," Curtis observed, his tone casual. "Couldn't sleep. I want everything to be perfect tonight." The irony of her words wasn't lost on Curtis. "It will be memorable," he assured her, and meant it completely. Curtis spent the morning making final preparations with his team. Omar had positioned 12 former Special Forces operatives throughout the property, disguised as catering staff, security personnel, and even guests. Each man was armed and briefed on the expected threat. Benny arrived early to take Tommy to what Curtis had told Kristen was a sleepover at his cousin's house. In reality, Tommy would be staying at a safe house with round-the-clock protection until the situation was resolved. "Remember what we talked about," Curtis told his son as Benny prepared to leave. "I know, Dad. Whatever happens tonight, you had to do it." The understanding in his son's eyes, both proud and heartbroken Curtis. Tommy had learned harsh truths about loyalty and betrayal that would serve him well in life, even if the lessons had come at a terrible cost. As evening approached, guests began arriving for what they believed was simply an anniversary celebration. The Henderson family was there, along with other high-profile clients and their security details. What made this gathering unique was the presence of Omar's carefully selected guests, men who looked like successful businessmen, but moved with the predatory grace of apex predators. Kristen played her part perfectly, greeting guests with charm and grace while her eyes constantly tracked the security personnel. She was mentally noting rotations and positions, unaware that everything she thought she knew about the evening security was wrong. At exactly 10:30 p.m., Curtis watched from his office security monitors as Kristen excused herself from the party. According to the plan she thought she was following, this was when she would disable key sensors and unlock certain doors. Instead, Curtis watched her trigger additional alarms and security measures that she didn't know existed. Trevor and his crew were already in position in the woods behind the estate. They had night vision equipment and weapons, believing they were about to execute a sophisticated robbery. In reality, they were walking into what would become their tomb. Curtis activated his communications system, connecting him to Omar and the entire security team. "All units, targets are in position. Phase 2 is go." At 11:15 p.m., exactly when they thought the security rotation would create their window, Trevor's crew moved toward the house. They expected to encounter minimal resistance and a predictable security response. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by professionals who had been tracking their every movement for hours. Ricky Hartman was the first to realize something was wrong when his electronic jamming equipment failed to disable the house's communications. "Trevor, something's not right. The systems aren't responding." "Stick to the plan," Trevor hissed, but his confidence was already wavering. Inside the house, Kristen was growing increasingly panicked as her attempts to disable security systems failed. Every code she entered was rejected. Every sensor she tried to bypass remained active. When she attempted to unlock the rear entrance for Trevor's entry, she triggered a silent alarm that immediately alerted Curtis. Curtis made his move at 11:30 p.m. He approached Kristen in the hallway where she was desperately trying to access a control panel. "Having trouble with the security system?" he asked quietly. Kristen spun around, her face pale. "Curtis, you startled me. The alarm seemed to be malfunctioning." "No malfunction," Curtis replied, his voice carrying a deadly calm. Everything is working exactly as intended. The realization hit Kristen like a physical blow. Curtis knew. The knowledge was written in his steel-gray eyes, and she understood that her carefully constructed deception had crumbled completely. "Curtis, I can explain." "No need. I've been watching you for weeks. I know about Trevor, about the plan, about everything." Outside, Trevor's crew was discovering that their intelligence was not just wrong. It was a carefully constructed trap. As they approached the house, motion sensors they couldn't see tracked their movements. When they reached what should have been their entry point, they found themselves in a killing field with armed men positioned at every possible escape route. Mario Knight was the first to panic. "This is a setup. We need to abort." But it was too late. Omar's voice cut through the night air, amplified by speakers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Trevor Galvin, Ricky Hartman, Mario Knight, and Wendell Camacho. You are surrounded by armed security personnel. Drop your weapons and surrender immediately." Trevor realized with dawning horror that Curtis not only knew who they were, but had been planning for this moment far longer than they had been planning their heist. Inside the house, Curtis continued his confrontation with Kristen while the party guests remained oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. "You sold out your family for what? A has-been trainer with criminal connections?" Curtis's voice dripped with contempt. "You don't understand. I understand that you gave him access to our home, our son, our lives. I understand that you were planning to help him rob our guests and steal information that could get people killed." Kristen's composure finally cracked. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt. Your intentions are irrelevant. Your actions put Tommy in danger. That's unforgivable." Outside, the confrontation was escalating. Wendell Camacho, the electronic specialist, made a desperate run for the tree line and was immediately tackled by two of Omar's men. Ricky Hartman tried to use his burglar tools to override a security door and received a painful shock from an electrified handle. Trevor, realizing that his crew was falling apart, made a fatal decision. He pulled out a pistol and fired warning shots into the air, hoping to create enough chaos to escape. The gunshots changed everything. What had been a controlled takedown became an active combat situation. Omar's men, all veterans with combat experience, responded with overwhelming force. Curtis heard the gunshots through his earpiece and made his own final move. The party's over. Kristen. Chapter 6. Blood in the Water. The gunshots shattered the evening's elegant facade. Curtis activated the estate's lockdown protocols, sealing all exits and triggering bulletproof barriers that transformed the mansion into an impregnable fortress. The party guests, now understanding that something serious was happening, were quickly moved to a secure area by Omar's disguised operatives. Outside, Trevor's crew found themselves in a nightmare scenario. Omar's team had night vision equipment, superior positioning, and the tactical experience to end the confrontation quickly. When Trevor fired his warning shots, he sealed his crew's fate. "Target has fired on security personnel." Omar's voice crackled through Curtis's earpiece. "We are cleared for lethal force." Curtis felt a cold satisfaction as he heard the controlled violence erupting outside. These men had threatened his family, his son, his life's work. They deserved everything that was coming to them. Ricky Hartman, desperate to escape, tried to scale the estate's security fence and was brought down by a taser that dropped him convulsing to the ground. Mario Knight attempted to use his enforcer tactics, threatening to kill hostages he didn't have, but found himself facing men who had handled real terrorists and weren't impressed by street-level intimidation. Wendell Camacho, the electronics expert, tried to use his knowledge of security systems to find an escape route, but Curtis had anticipated this and had placed false schematics in the materials Kristen had provided. Every route Wendell thought would lead to safety instead led him deeper into the trap. Inside the house, Curtis continued his confrontation with Kristen while monitoring the situation through his security feeds. On the screens, he could see Trevor making increasingly desperate attempts to escape, unaware that every exit had been anticipated and blocked. "This is what you chose," Curtis told his wife, gesturing toward the monitors showing the chaos outside. "You brought armed criminals to our home, where our son lives. Kristen was sobbing now, the reality of her situation finally penetrating her self-deception. I never thought it would come to this. Trevor said it would be simple, just some files and jewelry. Trevor lied to you, just like you lied to me. The difference is, his lies were more honest about their intentions. Curtis activated his communication system and spoke directly to Trevor through the external speakers. Trevor Galvin, this is Curtis Robertson. Your plan failed. Your crew is neutralized. You have one chance to surrender and live through the next 5 minutes. Trevor's response came in the form of more gunfire, this time directed at the house itself. The bullets struck reinforced windows designed to withstand such attacks, leaving barely visible spiderweb cracks. Poor choice, Curtis murmured, then spoke into his comm system. Omar, in this. What followed was a masterclass in tactical operations. Omar's team moved with precision and overwhelming force. Ricky Hartman, still recovering from the taser, was zip-tied and secured. Wendell Camacho, cornered in what he thought was an escape route, surrendered when faced with 3 assault rifles aimed at his chest. Mario Knight tried to fight and learned the difference between intimidating civilians and facing trained killers. He was subdued with minimum necessary force, which still left him unconscious and bleeding. Trevor, isolated and desperate, made his final stand near the estate's guest house. He had taken cover behind a decorative fountain and was firing wildly at shapes in the darkness, unaware that night vision scopes had been tracking his every movement for the past hour. Trevor Galvin, Omar's amplified voice cut through the night. Drop your weapon. This is your final warning. Trevor's response was to fire in the direction of Omar's voice, a mistake that revealed his exact position to 3 different marksmen who had been waiting for clear shots. Curtis watched the final moments through his security feeds with clinical detachment. Trevor had chosen violence over surrender, had threatened Curtis's family and guests, and had fired on security personnel. In Curtis's moral framework, Trevor had forfeited any claim to mercy. The end came quickly. 3 precisely placed shots from different angles ensured that Trevor's threat ended permanently. His crew would survive to face prosecution, but Trevor Galvin had crossed a line that Curtis considered unforgivable. Inside the house, Kristen watched her husband's face as he observed her lover's death on the security monitors. There was no satisfaction, no emotion at all, just the cold calculation of a man who had eliminated a threat to his family. You killed him, she whispered. He killed himself when he chose to bring violence to my home, Curtis replied. Just like you killed our marriage when you chose to betray our family. The police sirens were already approaching. Curtis had called them himself once the shooting started, confident that his actions would be ruled justified defense of his property and guests. Curtis turned to face his wife fully for the first time that evening. Kristen, you have a choice to make. You can cooperate with the police investigation, admit your role in this conspiracy, and accept whatever consequences come. Or you can try to lie your way out of this and discover what happens to people who continue to threaten my family. What are you saying? I'm saying that Trevor is dead, his crew is captured, and you are now the only loose end in a very dangerous situation. How I handle that loose end depends entirely on your next decisions. Kristen understood the implicit threat. Curtis had just demonstrated his willingness and ability to eliminate threats to his family. She was now faced with a choice between cooperation and potentially joining Trevor in death. What do you want me to do? Tell the truth. All of it. The affair, the plan, your cooperation with criminals who intended to rob our guests and steal information that could get people killed. Accept responsibility for your choices. As police cars flooded the estate's driveway, Curtis felt a cold satisfaction. The immediate threat was ended, but his revenge was just beginning. Kristen would face public humiliation and criminal charges, but that was only the first phase of her punishment. The real destruction was yet to come. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Detective Benny Ross arrived with the first wave of police units, immediately taking charge of the crime scene. As Curtis's half-brother, he had to recuse himself from the primary investigation, but his presence ensured that the initial response favored Curtis's narrative of defending his home against armed intruders. The scene that greeted the police was unambiguous, for armed men had attempted to rob a private residence during a social gathering. Trevor Galvin was dead. His 3 associates were in custody, and a significant amount of evidence supported the homeowner's claim of justified defense. Curtis met with the lead detective, Lloyd Parrish, in his home office while crime scene technicians processed the exterior grounds. Curtis presented himself as a shocked homeowner who had discovered his wife's affair and suspected that her lover might try something desperate. I had increased security for tonight's party specifically because I was concerned about Trevor's criminal background, Curtis explained, showing Detective Parrish the file Benny had compiled weeks earlier. I never imagined it would escalate to armed robbery. Kristen's questioning was conducted separately. She had 2 choices: tell the truth about her involvement and face criminal conspiracy charges, or lie to police and risk Curtis exposing even more damaging information. Curtis had made it clear that her cooperation was the only thing standing between her and complete destruction. Faced with evidence of her communications with Trevor, the keys she had provided him, and security footage of her attempting to disable alarms during the robbery, Kristen chose cooperation. Her tearful confession to Detective Parrish painted a picture of a lonely wife manipulated by a sophisticated criminal. "He said it would just be some jewelry and cash," she sobbed. "I never knew he was planning to steal Curtis's client files or that he would bring guns. I thought I was just helping him get back at Curtis for being so controlling." Her partial truths satisfied the immediate investigation while protecting Curtis from deeper scrutiny. She admitted to the affair and to providing Trevor with access to the house, but portrayed herself as a victim of manipulation rather than an active conspirator. The surviving members of Trevor's crew each faced different fates. Wendell Camacho, the electronic specialist, had no prior violent crimes and agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. Ricky Hartman, with multiple prior convictions, faced significant prison time but would eventually be released. Mario Knight, the enforcer, had outstanding warrants in 3 states and would likely die in prison. None of them would ever speak about the job again. Omar's team had made it very clear during their capture that any discussion of the Robertson family security arrangements would be considered a continued threat requiring permanent resolution. As dawn broke over the estate, Curtis stood in his office reviewing the night's events. The immediate threat was ended, but his revenge against Kristen was just beginning. The criminal charges she faced were merely the opening act of her destruction. Jeffrey Galvin, Curtis's lawyer, arrived as the police were finishing their initial investigation. He brought with him divorce papers that would devastate Kristen's financial future and ensure that her betrayal carried lasting consequences. "The prenuptial agreement is very specific about adultery," Jeffrey explained. "She forfeits any claim to marital assets, the house, and significant alimony. She'll receive a minimal settlement, enough to survive, but nothing approaching the lifestyle she's become accustomed to." What about custody of Tommy? "Given her involvement in criminal conspiracy that endangered the child, you'll receive full custody with minimal visitation rights for her. The court will view her actions as fundamentally incompatible with responsible parenting." Curtis felt a cold satisfaction as he reviewed the legal documents. Kristen would lose her home, her lifestyle, her son, and her social standing. She would be publicly humiliated and financially ruined. But Curtis wasn't finished with her yet. The morning after the raid, Curtis visited Tommy at the safe house where Benny had taken him. His son looked older somehow, as if the events had accelerated his transition from boy to man. "Is it over?" Tommy asked. "The immediate danger is over. Your mother will be facing criminal charges for her part in the plan, and will be getting divorced." Tommy nodded solemnly. "Good. I can't forgive her for what she did to us." Curtis studied his son's face and saw his own ruthless nature reflected there. Tommy had learned that betrayal carried consequences, that loyalty was not something to be taken lightly, and that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who hurt you most. "Are you okay with it just being us?" Curtis asked. "Yeah, Dad. We don't need her." The investigation continued for several days, but the conclusion was foregone. The physical evidence, witness statements, and Kristen's own confession painted a clear picture of a justified defense against armed intruders. Curtis was cleared of any wrongdoing, and the media coverage portrayed him as a hero who had protected his guests from violent criminals. Kristen's role in the conspiracy received less media attention, partly due to Curtis's influence with local news outlets, and partly because her lawyers encouraged her to maintain a low profile. She was charged with conspiracy to commit burglary and providing material support to criminals, charges that would likely result in probation given her cooperation and lack of prior criminal history. But the legal consequences were only the beginning of her punishment. Curtis had spent weeks preparing a campaign of social and financial destruction that would follow her for years. He leaked information about the affair to every social circle they had shared, ensuring that Kristen would be ostracized from the elite community she had worked so hard to join. He used his business connections to ensure that she would find it difficult to obtain employment in any respectable field. Most devastating of all, he arranged for the media to receive details about her role in the conspiracy that painted her as a willing participant rather than a manipulated victim. Within 2 weeks of the raid, Kristen had been evicted from the estate, abandoned by most of her friends, and faced a future of social exile and financial hardship. She would survive, but the comfortable life she had known was over forever. Curtis felt no sympathy for her suffering. In his mind, she had made her choices and would live with the consequences. The woman who had betrayed her family and endangered her son deserved no mercy from the man she had wronged. Chapter 8. The Price of Betrayal. 3 months after the raid, Kristen Robertson sat in a cramped studio apartment in a declining neighborhood of Los Angeles, staring at yet another rejection letter. Her attempts to find employment had been systematically sabotaged by Curtis's far-reaching influence in business circles. Every application seemed to result in sudden disinterest once prospective employers learned her name. The criminal case had concluded with a plea bargain that gave her 2 years probation and 500 hours of community service. She had avoided prison, but the conviction meant that many professional opportunities were permanently closed to her. More devastating was the complete social exile she now experienced. The divorce proceedings had been brutal. Jeffrey Galvin had methodically dismantled every argument her lawyers presented, using the prenuptial agreement and her criminal conviction to strip away any claim to the life she had known. The final settlement left her with barely enough to rent her current apartment and buy necessities. Kristen had been allowed to see Tommy exactly 3 times since the raid, supervised visits that had been painfully awkward. Her son treated her with polite indifference, as if she were a stranger rather than his mother. The 14-year-old boy had clearly absorbed his father's lesson about the consequences of betrayal. "I don't understand why you did it, Mom," Tommy had said during their last visit. "We had everything. Dad loved you. I loved you. Why wasn't that enough?" Kristen had no answer that would satisfy him or herself. The affair with Trevor seemed like a fever dream now, a destructive impulse that had cost her everything precious in her life. Meanwhile, Curtis had rebuilt his family's life with methodical precision. He had increased his company's security protocols and client base, using the attempted robbery as a marketing tool that demonstrated his firm's effectiveness. The story of the executive who had single-handedly defeated armed intruders had become legendary in security industry circles. Tommy had adapted to their new family structure with the resilience of youth. Curtis made sure to spend more time with his son, teaching him lessons about loyalty, strength, and the importance of choosing allies carefully. "Your mother made choices that put our family at risk," Curtis explained during one of their evening talks. "Sometimes people we trust will disappoint us. The key is to learn from their failures and never repeat their mistakes." Curtis also ensured that his son understood the importance of consequences. Tommy had seen firsthand how betrayal led to destruction, how loyalty was rewarded and disloyalty was punished. These were lessons that would shape the young man's character for life. But Curtis wasn't satisfied with Kristen's current level of suffering. In his mind, she had endangered Tommy and violated the sacred trust of family. Her punishment needed to be more comprehensive and permanent. Using his connections in the private investigation industry, Curtis began implementing the next phase of her destruction. He arranged for Kristen to be repeatedly scammed by predatory financial services that targeted vulnerable people. Her credit was systematically destroyed through carefully orchestrated identity theft that could never be traced back to Curtis. Medical bills for treatments she never received appeared on her credit report. Utility companies demanded payment for services at addresses where she had never lived. Collection agencies pursued her for debts that didn't exist but were impossible to disprove without expensive legal representation she couldn't afford. Kristen found herself trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare where her attempts to clear her name only resulted in more problems. Every agency she contacted referred her to another agency, each demanding payments she couldn't make to resolve issues she hadn't created. The psychological pressure was immense. Kristen began suffering from anxiety attacks and depression, conditions that made it even harder for her to find employment or maintain relationships. She had lost weight, her health was declining, and she lived in constant fear of eviction or arrest for debts she couldn't pay. Curtis monitored her deterioration through private investigators and felt a cold satisfaction at her suffering. In his worldview, she was experiencing exactly what she deserved. The woman who had betrayed her family was learning that actions had consequences that extended far beyond immediate punishment. One evening, as Curtis reviewed the latest reports on Kristen's declining situation, Tommy knocked on his office door. "Dad, can I ask you something about Mom?" Curtis looked up from his paperwork. "What do you want to know? Are you ever going to forgive her?" The question was direct and unexpected. Curtis studied his son's face, looking for signs of sympathy for Kristen that might need to be corrected. "Why do you ask?" "I saw her at the grocery store last week. She looked really bad, Dad. Thin and scared. I almost didn't recognize her." Curtis felt a moment of concern that his son might be developing misplaced sympathy for the woman who had betrayed them. "How would that make you feel?" Tommy was quiet for a long moment. "I felt sorry for her, but I also felt angry that I felt sorry for her. Does that make sense?" Curtis nodded approvingly. His son was experiencing the natural human response to suffering while also maintaining the emotional discipline to remember why that suffering was justified. "Your mother made choices that could have gotten us killed," Curtis reminded him. "She chose her own pleasure over our family's safety. The consequences she's experiencing now are the direct result of those choices. But will it ever be enough? Will you ever stop punishing her?" Curtis considered the question carefully. In truth, he had no intention of ever stopping. In his mind, Kristen's betrayal was unforgivable, and her punishment should be permanent. But he also recognized that his son needed to understand justice rather than cruelty. When someone betrays their family, they forfeit their right to mercy, Curtis finally answered. "Your mother will live with the consequences of her choices for the rest of her life, just as we have to live with the trauma she caused us." Tommy accepted this explanation, but Curtis sensed that his son was beginning to develop his own moral framework that might not perfectly align with Curtis's desire for perpetual revenge. It was a development that Curtis would need to monitor carefully. The last thing he wanted was for misplaced compassion to interfere with the important lessons Tommy was learning about loyalty and consequences. Chapter 9. The Final Lesson. 2 years after the raid, Curtis stood in his office reviewing quarterly reports that showed his security company had tripled in size. The story of the executive who had defeated armed intruders had become industry legend, bringing him high-profile clients from across the country. Tommy, now 16, was thriving in his private school and had grown into a confident young man who understood the value of loyalty and strength. The latest surveillance report on Kristen showed that she was living in a homeless shelter and working part-time at a laundromat. Her health had deteriorated significantly due to stress, poor nutrition, and untreated medical conditions. She looked decades older than her actual age and showed signs of severe depression. Curtis felt no sympathy as he reviewed the photographs. In his mind, every aspect of her suffering was justified by her betrayal of their family. She had chosen to endanger Tommy and violate the sacred trust of marriage. The consequences were appropriate and permanent. A knock on his office door interrupted his review. Tommy entered, carrying a college acceptance letter from Stanford. "Dad, I got in," Tommy announced with quiet pride. Curtis felt a surge of paternal satisfaction. His son had maintained perfect grades while learning the hard lessons about family loyalty that would serve him throughout life. Congratulations. This is exactly what you've earned through your dedication and character. Tommy sat down across from his father's desk, but his expression wasn't entirely celebratory. Dad, I need to tell you something. Curtis recognized the serious tone and gave his son full attention. I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately. About what happened, about what's happening to her now. Curtis felt a familiar concern that his son might be developing misplaced sympathy for the woman who had betrayed them. What specifically have you been thinking? I understand why she had to be punished. I understand that what she did was unforgivable. But I've been wondering if maybe the punishment should have an end point. Curtis studied his son's face carefully. Tommy had grown into a thoughtful young man with his own moral reasoning, which was both a source of pride and a potential complication. Explain your thinking. She's been living on the streets for 6 months. Her health is failing. She's not a threat to us anymore, and she's not capable of hurting anyone else. At what point does justice become cruelty? Curtis appreciated his son's analytical approach to the question, even if he disagreed with the conclusion. Tommy, what your mother did wasn't just adultery. She collaborated with armed criminals who could have killed us both. She put your life at risk for her own selfish desires. That kind of betrayal doesn't have a statute of limitations. I know what she did was terrible. I'll never forgive her for it, and I don't want her back in our lives. But watching her destroy herself doesn't make me feel better about what happened. It just makes me feel like we're becoming something we shouldn't be. Curtis felt a mixture of pride and concern at his son's words. Tommy had developed strong moral reasoning and the confidence to express disagreement with his father. These were admirable traits that would serve him well in life. However, Curtis also recognized that mercy could be seen as weakness, and weakness invited further betrayal. What do you think we should do? I think we should stop. Not forgive her, not take her back, not pretend that what she did was acceptable, but stop actively destroying her. Let her live with the natural consequences of her choices without us making those consequences worse. Curtis considered his son's proposal. The active campaign against Kristen had required significant resources and attention that could be better directed toward building their future. Tommy would be leaving for college soon, and Curtis wanted his son to respect him rather than fear him. If we stop the active measures against her, what message does that send about the consequences of betraying family? It sends the message that we're strong enough to move on, that we don't need to keep proving our point because everyone already understands it. Curtis realized that his son had matured beyond his expectations. Tommy wasn't advocating for forgiveness or reconciliation. He was suggesting that continued revenge was beneath them. It was a sophisticated moral position that demonstrated strength rather than weakness. Very well, Curtis decided. We'll stop the active measures. She'll live with the consequences of her choices, but we won't make those consequences worse. Tommy nodded gratefully. Thank you, Dad. That evening, Curtis called off the private investigators and financial harassment campaigns that had been systematically destroying Kristen's life. She would continue to live with the natural consequences of her criminal conviction, social exile, and financial ruin, but Curtis would no longer actively make her situation worse. 6 months later, Curtis received word that Kristen had died of complications from pneumonia while living in a homeless shelter. She had been found with a letter addressed to Tommy, which Curtis read before deciding whether to share it with his son. The letter was a simple apology acknowledging her betrayal and expressing regret for the choices that had destroyed their family. She asked for no forgiveness and made no excuses, simply stating that she hoped Tommy would learn from her mistakes and build a better life than she had managed. Curtis showed the letter to Tommy, who read it without emotion. "How do you feel?" Curtis asked. "Sad that it ended this way, but not sorry that it's over," Tommy replied. "She made her choices, and she lived with them. That's more honest than most people manage." Curtis felt a deep satisfaction at his son's response. Tommy had learned the most important lesson of all, that loyalty was precious, betrayal was costly, and strong people moved forward rather than dwelling on those who had failed them. The Robertson family legacy would continue with Tommy, who understood the value of loyalty and the price of betrayal. Curtis had built something permanent from the ashes of Kristen's destruction, a son who would never repeat her mistakes and would carry forward the lessons learned from her failure. In Curtis's mind, justice had been served completely. Kristen had paid the ultimate price for her betrayal, and Tommy had learned the importance of choosing loyalty over temptation. The family name was stronger than ever, and the future was secure. The story of betrayal and revenge had reached its conclusion, with loyalty triumphant and betrayal punished. Curtis Robertson had protected his family's honor and ensured that the lessons learned would guide them for generations to come. As he stood in his office that evening, looking out over the estate that Kristen had tried to help criminals rob, Curtis felt a cold satisfaction. He had won completely and permanently. The weak had been eliminated, the strong had survived, and justice had been served without compromise or mercy. In Curtis Robertson's world, that was exactly how it should be. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.